3 hours. That is roughly how long it would take you to watch every single episode of South Park that has been banned, censored, threatened by extremists, pulled from streaming platforms, or scrubbed from the internet by foreign governments. 3 hours is also how long a baby named Kenny McCormick takes to grow from a newborn back into a 9-year-old boy after being brutally killed for the 50th time in a row, at least according to the show's actual canon. And 3 hours is what you and I are going to spend together tonight, going through every single layer of the South Park iceberg, from the stuff everyone knows at the very top, all the way down to the production secrets, hidden lore, and bizarre real-life events that even die-hard fans have never heard of. South Park has been on the air since August 13th, 1997. It has spanned 28 seasons, 338 episodes, a theatrical film that holds a Guinness World Record, 7 streaming specials, multiple video games, and a $1.5 billion deal that guarantees the show will continue through at least 2029. It was the first weekly television program in history to receive a TVMA rating. It was created by 2 college students named Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who made the original pilot using actual construction paper and stop-motion photography in a process that took 3 months to complete. Every episode since then has been animated by computer to look like it was still made out of paper, and every episode since Season 4 has been written, animated, and delivered to Comedy Central in approximately 6 days. Sometimes the finished episode arrives at the network just hours before it is supposed to air. On the surface, this is a show about 4 foul-mouthed kids standing at a bus stop in a small Colorado mountain town. But underneath that surface, there are layers upon layers of lore, mythology, real-world controversy, hidden details, and secrets that stretch back over a quarter century. Tonight, we are going all the way down, so get comfortable, this is going to take a while. We are starting at the very top of the iceberg, the surface level, the things that pretty much anyone who has ever watched even a single episode of South Park already knows. And we have to start with the 4 boys, because without them, none of this exists. Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick. 4 elementary school kids living in the fictional town of South Park, Colorado, which is modeled on the real-life South Park basin near Fairplay in the Rocky Mountains, roughly an hour's drive from Denver. Their everyday problems have a habit of escalating into completely absurd satirical scenarios involving local residents, celebrities, politicians, religious figures, and whatever else happens to be in the news that particular week. The boys usually end up serving as the voices of reason, crude as they might be, against a world full of adults who have completely lost their minds. Stan is the everyman of the group and is directly modeled after series co-creator Trey Parker. They share a birthday. The names of Stan's immediate family members match Parker's real family. Stan is the kid who usually gets the moral of the story at the end of an episode, turning to the camera and saying something like, "You know, I learned something today." He is meant to be the audience surrogate, the relatively normal kid surrounded by chaos. Kyle is Stan's best friend and is modeled after Matt Stone. He is Jewish, and his portrayal as one of the few Jewish people in South Park is a constant source of satire throughout the series. Kyle is the moral compass of the group, the one who pushes back against injustice, bigotry, and especially against Cartman's worst impulses. The friendship between Stan and Kyle is symbolically intended to reflect the real friendship between Parker and Stone, and it shows up as a recurring theme across dozens of episodes and multiple specials. Then there is Eric Cartman, and there really is no easy way to describe Cartman. He is loud, he is obnoxious, he is obese, he is amoral and increasingly psychopathic as the series progresses. His anti-Semitism has fueled an ever-escalating rivalry with Kyle that has lasted the entire run of the show. Cartman is commonly portrayed as the series' antagonist, but he is also somehow its most beloved character. He is the one fans quote the most. He is the one who drives the most memorable plots. And he is the one responsible for what most people consider the single greatest moment in South Park history, but we will get to that shortly. And then there is Kenny McCormick. Kenny comes from a poor family. He wears his orange parka hood so tightly that it covers most of his face and muffles his speech to the point where most of what he says is completely incomprehensible to the average viewer. Kenny is famous for one thing above all else, and that brings us to our next entry on the iceberg. Oh my God, they killed Kenny. You bastards, if you know nothing else about South Park, you probably know this. For the first 5 seasons of the show, Kenny died in nearly every single episode. He would be crushed by something, blown up, eaten, impaled, set on fire, struck by lightning, or killed in some other spectacularly violent and creative way. Stan would shout, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." And Kyle would follow up with, "You bastards." Then, in the next episode, Kenny would be back at the bus stop as if nothing had happened. On merchandise everywhere. T-shirts on merchandise everywhere. T-shirts, bumper stickers, baseball caps, calendars. It even inspired a rap song called "Kenny's Dead" by Master P, which ended up on the Chef Aid album. The exclamation became so deeply embedded in pop culture that people who had never seen a single episode of South Park could still tell you what came after, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." But here's the thing, Parker and Stone eventually got bored of it. By the time season 5 rolled around, they had run out of creative ways to kill Kenny and found themselves shoehorning his death into episodes where it did not really fit. So in the penultimate episode of season 5, they killed Kenny for real. The episode was literally called Kenny Dies. In it, Kenny is diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the story is played completely straight. No joke, no reset. Kenny actually dies, and Cartman has to go before Congress to argue in favor of stem cell research to try to save him. Kenny did not come back for most of season 6. When he finally reappeared in the season 6 finale, his friends barely reacted. Stan just said, "Oh hey Kenny," like he had been gone for the weekend instead of an entire season. The show moved on, and from that point forward, Kenny's deaths became occasional rather than mandatory. Parker and Stone only killed him when they had a genuinely funny way to do it. But here's where it gets interesting. The show never actually explained how or why Kenny kept coming back to life for years. There were hints here and there. In one episode, it is shown that Kenny's soul returns to his mother. She gives birth to a new Kenny, and he grows back to his current age in a matter of hours. His father even comments that it must be the 50th time it has happened, and his mother corrects him. 52nd. But a full canonical explanation would not arrive until season 14, and when it did, it changed everything fans thought they knew about Kenny McCormick. We will get to that deeper in the iceberg. Now, you cannot talk about the surface level of South Park without talking about where it all came from. And the origin story of this show is genuinely one of the wildest in television history. In 1992, Trey Parker and Matt Stone were film students at the University of Colorado. Parker created a short animated film called The Spirit of Christmas, subtitled Jesus vs. Frosty. It was made using actual construction paper cutouts animated through stop-motion photography. The short featured 4 boys who were clearly prototypes of the main South Park cast, watching Jesus fight a killer snowman version of Frosty. The animation was crude, the humor was vulgar, and it was made essentially as a college project. 3 years later, in 1995, a man named Brian Graydon paid Parker and Stone a few $1,000s to make a second short film that he could send out as a video Christmas card to his friends. Parker and Stone created another Spirit of Christmas short, this time subtitled Jesus vs. Santa, featuring the boys watching Jesus and Santa Claus get into a violent street fight over the true meaning of Christmas. Kenny appeared in the short with his name for the first time and was killed during the fight, establishing the gag that would define his character. Graydon sent the short to his friends copied it and sent it to their friends. Those friends copied it and sent it further. In an era before YouTube, before social media, before viral videos were even a concept, this crude little cartoon spread across the country on VHS tapes and early internet file sharing. It became what many people consider one of the very first viral videos, years before that term existed. The short caught the attention of Comedy Central, and in 1997, South Park debuted with the episode Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. The pilot was produced using the same construction paper stop-motion technique as the original shorts, which is why it took 3 months to complete. Every single episode after the pilot has been produced using computer animation specifically designed to replicate the look of those paper cutouts. The show deliberately maintained its crude, handmade aesthetic even as the technology behind it became increasingly sophisticated. And from that first episode, South Park became a cultural phenomenon almost overnight, which brings us to our next surface-level entry. Scott Tenorman Must Die, Season 5, Episode 4. The highest-rated episode of South Park on IMDb with a 9.6 out of 10. This is widely considered the single greatest episode in the show's history, and it is the moment that fundamentally redefined who Eric Cartman was as a character. Here's what happens. A 9th grader named Scott Tenorman tricks Cartman into buying his pubic hair for $10, telling Cartman that having pubes means he has reached maturity. Cartman realizes he has been scammed and tries to get his money back, but Scott outsmarts him at every turn. Scott cheats Cartman out of an additional $6.12, then humiliates him by making him beg for his money back before burning it right in front of his face. This is where a normal person would accept the loss and move on. This is not what Cartman does. Cartman orchestrates an elaborate revenge scheme. He arranges for Scott Tenorman's parents to be killed by a local farmer. He then has their bodies ground up into chili. He enters the chili into a chili cook-off at a town event, and he tricks Scott into eating the chili made from his own parents. As Scott is crying and vomiting, his favorite band Radiohead, who actually guest voiced themselves in the episode, shows up and mocks him for being a crybaby. Cartman licks Scott's tears off his face. Before this episode, Cartman was a foul-mouthed, obnoxious kid who said terrible things for shock value. After this episode, Cartman was something else entirely. He was a genuine psychopath capable of unthinkable acts of cruelty. Parker and Stone have both pointed to Scott Tenorman Must Die as the episode that changed the trajectory of the entire series. And the twist would get even darker nearly a decade later when the show revealed something about Scott Tenorman's father that nobody saw coming. But that is deeper in the iceberg. Still at the surface level, we need to talk about the movie. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, was released on June 30th, 1999. It had a budget of $21 million and grossed $83.1 million worldwide. The film entered the 2001 Guinness Book of World Records for the most swearing in an animated film. And one of its songs, Blame Canada, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Robin Williams performed the song at the Oscar ceremony. The plot of the movie centers on the boys sneaking into a Terrence and Phillip movie filled with vulgar language. Their parents, horrified by the crude Canadian humor, form a group called Mothers Against Canada and essentially start a war with the entire country. The movie is a musical, and the songs written by Trey Parker and Mark Shaman are legitimately excellent. Blame Canada became a genuine cultural moment. The film satirizes moral panic, censorship, and the tendency of parents to blame media for their children's behavior, which is exactly what was happening to South Park in real life at the time. The film also features Kenny dying and going to hell, where he meets Satan and Saddam Hussein, who are depicted as being in a romantic relationship. Kenny's sacrifice at the climax of the film earns him a place in heaven, and the movie ends with him ascending with wings and a halo. It is genuinely touching, which is something you would not expect from a movie that holds the world record for animated swearing. Now, the last major surface-level entry is the one that makes South Park fundamentally different from every other animated show on television. The 6-day production cycle. Most animated television shows take 8 to 9 months to produce a single episode, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, all of them work on episodes many months in advance. South Park produces an episode in roughly 6 days. The cycle starts on a Thursday morning. Parker Stone and their writing consultant sit in a room and brainstorm concepts. Parker drafts the script. Approximately 70 people, including animators, editors, and sound engineers, then work 100 to 120-hour weeks to bring that script to life. The finalized episode is transmitted via satellite uplink to Comedy Central on Wednesday, sometimes arriving at the network mere hours before the 10 p.m. broadcast. This insane schedule is what allows South Park to comment on current events almost in real time. When something major happens in the news, South Park can have an episode about it on the air within a week. No other animated show can do this. The Simpsons would need to wait the better part of a year. South Park can respond in days. This production method was documented in a 2011 documentary called 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, which aired on Comedy Central. The documentary shows the grueling, sleep-deprived reality of how the show gets made, and it reveals just how much of the creative process rests on Trey Parker's shoulders. Parker writes, directs, voices the majority of the male characters, and oversees virtually every aspect of production. He has been credited as writer on 325 episodes and director on 317. The 6-day cycle is both the show's greatest strength and its most precarious vulnerability. In 2013, a power outage at South Park Studios in Culver City prevented the season 17 premiere from being completed on time. The episode had to be delayed by a full week. When your margin for error is measured in hours rather than months, even a brief power loss becomes catastrophic. And in 2025, they actually missed a deadline entirely for the first time. But that story is much deeper in the iceberg. If you're enjoying this so far, make sure to subscribe. We are just getting started, and it only gets deeper from here. Now we are moving below the waterline. This is the second tier of the iceberg, the things that regular South Park viewers tend to pick up over time, but that casual watchers miss entirely. And we are starting with one of the most fascinating pieces of canon in the entire show. Kenny McCormick is immortal, not metaphorically, not as a cartoon convenience. Within the actual storyline of South Park, Kenny McCormick possesses a genuine supernatural power. He cannot die. For years, Kenny's deaths and rebirths were treated as a running gag with no explanation. But in the season 14 episodes, Coon 2, Hindsight, Mysterion Rises, and Coon vs. Coon and Friends, the show finally pulled back the curtain. Kenny, operating under the superhero identity Mysterion, reveals his power to the audience directly. Every time he dies, he wakes up in his bed the next morning, fully restored. His mother gives birth to him again, and he ages back to his current state within hours, retaining all of his memories and his physical appearance. This has happened dozens, possibly hundreds of times, but here's the truly horrifying part. Nobody remembers. Every time Kenny dies, every person who witnessed his death forgets it ever happened by the next day, even if they watched him get decapitated right in front of them. Even if they were the ones who exclaimed, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," just hours earlier. By the time Kenny reappears, it is as if his death never occurred. Kenny is the only person who remembers. He carries the full weight of every single death he has ever experienced, and he cannot share that burden with anyone because no one will ever believe him. In one devastating scene, Kenny, as Mysterion, shoots himself in the head twice in front of his friends, desperately trying to prove that he cannot die and that they always forget. It does not work. They forget immediately. So where does this power come from? The show traces it to the cult of Cthulhu. Kenny's parents, Stuart and Carol McCormick, attended Cult of Cthulhu meetings before Kenny was born. They were not believers. According to Carol, they just went for the free beer. But their casual attendance at these meetings apparently created a supernatural connection between Kenny and the Lovecraftian entity Cthulhu. Kenny's immortality is essentially a curse, tied to forces far beyond his understanding or control. After his death, Carol McCormick mutters under her breath, "I knew we should have never gone to those cult meetings." She is probably tired of having to give birth to Kenny over and over again. Kenny himself views his power as a curse, not a gift. At one point during the Coon trilogy, he even tries to get Cthulhu to kill him, reasoning that only an immortal can kill another immortal. The attempt fails, Kenny is stuck. He will keep dying and keep coming back, and no one except him will ever know. The show has also established that Kenny can possess other people's bodies if his ashes are consumed. After his permanent death in Season 5, Cartman accidentally drank Kenny's ashes in A Ladder to Heaven, thinking they were chocolate milk mix. This triggered a multi-episode possession arc where Kenny gradually took control of Cartman's body, culminating in The Biggest Douche in the Universe, where Cartman needed an exorcism. This ability has never been fully explained, but it is almost certainly connected to Kenny's Cthulhu-linked supernatural nature. There's also a persistent question about what happens to Kenny long-term. He was a baby at some point and grew to be 9 years old, so he does age. But whether he stops aging once he reaches adulthood remains unclear. If the rebirth process requires his mother, it is also unclear what happens after she eventually passes away. Kenny might be trapped in a kind of Highlander scenario, cursed with a form of immortality that even he does not fully understand. The Cthulhu connection also raises fascinating questions about South Park's underlying mythology. The show has always featured supernatural elements, from Jesus Christ living in town as a regular resident to Satan throwing Halloween parties to death being a recurring character. But the Cthulhu revelation suggests that there is a deeper cosmology at work beneath the show's crude surface, one where Lovecraftian elder gods, biblical figures, and cartoon characters all coexist in the same reality. And nobody remembers any of it the next day, except Kenny. Always Kenny. Now let us talk about one of the longest-running mysteries in South Park history, the identity of Eric Cartman's father. Season 1 ended with a cliffhanger episode called Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, in which the question of who fathered Cartman is raised for the first time. A DNA test is conducted, and multiple men from South Park are teased as potential candidates, including Chef, Officer Barbrady, Jimbo, Ned, Mr. Garrison, Kyle's dad Gerald, a man named Chief Running Water, Dr. Mephisto, and even the entire 1989 Denver Broncos football team. The episode ended without revealing the answer, leaving audiences to wait for Season 2. When Season 2 premiered, Parker and Stone pulled off one of the greatest troll moves in television history. Instead of resolving the cliffhanger, the first episode of Season 2 was an entirely unrelated Terrence and Philip April Fool's special. Fans were furious. Comedy Central reportedly received thousands of angry phone calls. Parker and Stone thought it was hilarious. The actual resolution came in the second episode of Season 2. Cartman's mom is still a dirty slut. The big reveal was that Cartman's mother, Leon Cartman, was actually a hermaphrodite. She was both Cartman's mother and his father. This was presented as the definitive answer and accepted as canon for years. Then came Season 14, Episode 6, 201. In 201, a character named Scott Tenorman returns. He has been in a mental institution since the events of Scott Tenorman Must Die, driven insane by the trauma of eating his parents in Chile. Scott reveals that he has been researching Cartman's background during his time in the asylum, and he has discovered something that changes everything. Jack Tenorman, Scott's father, was a right tackle for the Denver Broncos. He had an affair with Leon Cartman, and that affair produced an illegitimate child. That child was Eric Cartman. The entire town of South Park covered this up because the Broncos were having a good season and could not afford any distractions. This means that Jack Tenorman was Cartman's biological father, which means that Scott Tenorman is Cartman's half-brother, and the truly devastating twist is this. Twist In Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman had Scott's parents killed and ground into chili. Cartman unknowingly murdered his own father and fed his father's remains to his half-brother. Scott delivers the punchline directly. You killed your own father and then you fed him to your half-brother. Cartman is horrified, but not for the reasons you might expect. His primary concern is not that he committed patricide. His primary concern is that Jack Tenorman was a ginger, which means Cartman is half ginger. He does eventually find some comfort in the fact that being the son of a Denver Bronco is at least somewhat cool. But the moral weight of what he did, killing his own father without knowing it, hangs over the character from that point forward. This retcon transformed Scott Tenorman Must Die from a dark comedy episode into something genuinely tragic. A boy unknowingly murdered his own father because a teenager scammed him out of $16. Moving on, in the second tier of the iceberg, we need to talk about Isaac Hayes, Scientology, and the death of Chef. Chef, whose full name was Jerome McElroy, was one of the most beloved characters in South Park history. He was the school cafeteria worker at South Park Elementary, voiced by the legendary soul musician Isaac Hayes. Advice was usually delivered through inappropriate R-rated songs about making love. Chef appeared in approximately 136 to 150 episodes across the first 9 seasons, making him one of the longest-running recurring characters in the show. Everything changed in 2005 when South Park aired the Season 9 episode, Trapped in the Closet. The episode was a savage satire of Scientology, depicting the actual beliefs of the religion in detail and including a subplot where Tom Cruise literally refuses to come out of a closet. The episode ran a disclaimer at the bottom of the screen during the Scientology explanation that read, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." Isaac Hayes was a practicing Scientologist. In early 2006, he departed the show, publicly stating that he could no longer be associated with a program that showed religious intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs. Parker and Stone responded publicly, noting that Hayes had been perfectly happy to cash his paycheck while the show mocked Christians, Muslims, Jews, Mormons, and every other religious group for 9 straight years, and that he only objected when his own beliefs were targeted. Matt Stone said in interviews that he felt strongly that Hayes had been pressured to quit by the Church of Scientology rather than making the decision independently. Chef was killed off in the Season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, in one of the most brutal death sequences in the show's history. Chef falls off a burning bridge, hitting the rocks on the side of the ravine as he falls. He is impaled on a tree branch. A mountain lion appears and attacks him. Then a grizzly bear shows up. One of the bystanders tries to shoot the animals but misses and hits Chef instead. Finally, the bear and the lion rip his face off and tear his body apart. Stan exclaims, "Oh my God, they killed Chef," in the same style as Kenny's famous deaths, and Kyle follows up with, "You bastards." The dialogue for Chef in this episode was created entirely by splicing together recordings from previous seasons. Hayes did not record any new lines. The episode's plot involves Chef being brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club, a thinly veiled stand-in for Scientology, which lures people in with promises of adventure before turning them into mindless devotees. Should be mad at that fruity little club for scrambling his brains. The episode ends with Chef's corpse being rebuilt into a Darth Vader-like suit, complete with a glowing red spatula. It was Parker and Stone's way of saying goodbye to a character they loved while making their feelings about Scientology unmistakably clear. Now, still in the second tier, we need to discuss what might be the most consequential controversy in South Park's history. The banned Muhammad episodes. 5 episodes of South Park have been pulled from streaming platforms and syndication, and they all involve depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. Super Best Friends from Season 5 originally aired in 2001 without any controversy whatsoever. The episode featured Muhammad as one of a team of superhero-like religious figures, alongside Jesus, Buddha, Moses, Krishna, Lao Tzu, and Joseph Smith. Nobody complained, nobody noticed. The episode aired, ran in reruns, and was available on the show's website for years. Then came Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Part 2 in Season 10. These episodes tackled the controversy around a Danish newspaper publishing cartoons of Muhammad, with the plot revolving around whether a fictional show within the show would air an image of Muhammad. Comedy Central partially censored the episodes, inserting black bars over Muhammad's image. Parker and Stone were frustrated but not entirely surprised. The real firestorm arrived in Season 14 with the two-part episodes 200 and 201. These episodes brought back virtually every celebrity the show had ever mocked and revisited the Muhammad controversy directly. After 200 aired, a website associated with a radical organization called Revolution Muslim posted what many interpreted as thinly veiled death threats against Parker and Stone. The post included the address of South Park Studios in Culver City and imagery associated with the murder of Theo van Gogh, a Dutch filmmaker who had been killed by an extremist. Comedy Central panicked. When 201 aired, the network had inserted extensive audio bleeps and visual censoring, reportedly without Parker and Stone's approval. The entire final speech of the episode, which contained the actual moral lesson, was completely bleeped out, along with every single mention of Muhammad's name throughout the episode. Parker and Stone have stated that they do not know if an uncensored version of 201 will ever be released. Both 200 and 201 were pulled from streaming, syndication, and online availability. Super Best Friends, which had aired uncensored years earlier with zero controversy, was retroactively pulled as well. Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Part 2 were also removed from streaming bundles. All 5 episodes remain unavailable on major platforms to this day. The FBI reportedly provided security to Parker and Stone during this period. The incident sparked the Everybody Draw Muhammad Day movement online in 2010, which was partially inspired by the show's censorship controversy. It remains one of the most significant instances of creative censorship in American television history, and it demonstrated that even a show as fearless as South Park could be silenced when the threats became serious enough. Let us move to something a bit lighter, but equally fascinating. The Tolken to Tolkien retcon. For 25 seasons, the only black student at South Park Elementary was known as Tolken Black. The name was clearly a meta joke, a commentary on tokenism in television, where a single minority character is included to check a diversity box. The character's name was printed in scripts, shown in closed captioning, and understood by fans as Token for a quarter of a century. Then, in season 25, the episode The Big Fix dropped a bombshell. The character's name was actually Tolken Black, named after J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. Stan had been calling him Token the entire time, and the joke was that Stan was the racist one for assuming it was a commentary on tokenism rather than a literary reference. As a bonus, Parker and Stone went back and retroactively changed the closed captioning on every single previous episode that included the character. Everywhere it previously read Token, it now reads Tolkien. The character's voice actor, Adrien Beard, who is a production supervisor and storyboard artist at South Park Studios, has voiced Tolkien for approximately 78 episodes since season 4. And speaking of Beard's casting, the reason he got the role in the first place is one of those small production details that perfectly captures the spirit of South Park. When Parker needed someone to voice the show's only black student, Beard was, in Parker's own words, the only black guy in the building. So he got the job. He has held it for over 2 decades. The last major entry in the second tier is the China ban. In 2019, South Park aired the season 23 episode Banned in China. The episode criticized Hollywood's tendency to self-censor in order to appease the Chinese market, and depicted Winnie the Pooh, who had been banned in China as a caricature of President Xi Jinping, imprisoned in a labor camp alongside other characters who had run afoul of Chinese censorship. The response from the Chinese government was immediate and total. They enacted a blanket ban on the entire South Park franchise. Every episode was scrubbed from Chinese streaming platforms. The show's name was removed from search results on Baidu, the country's dominant search engine. Discussion of South Park was deleted from Douban, Jihu, Bilibili, Sina Weibo, and WeChat. It was not a partial ban or a censorship of specific episodes. It was a complete erasure of the show from the Chinese internet. Parker and Stone responded with a mock apology that has since become iconic. Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She doesn't look like Winnie the Pooh at all. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be a bountiful one. The statement was dripping with sarcasm, and it only made the ban more permanent. The ban remains in effect. South Park is completely unavailable in mainland China. If you're still with me, make sure to subscribe. We are about to go deeper. We are now entering the third tier of the iceberg. This is dedicated fan knowledge, the kind of stuff you only pick up if you have been paying close attention to the show for years, or if you have followed its production closely. And we are starting with one of the saddest stories in South Park's history, the death of Mary Kay Bergman. Mary Kay Bergman voiced the vast majority of South Park's female characters during the show's first 3 seasons. Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, Sharon Marsh, Wendy Testaberger, Mayor McDaniels, and dozens of other recurring and one-off female characters were all performed by Bergman. She was extraordinarily talented, capable of creating distinct voices for a huge roster of characters, and she was also one of the most prolific voice actresses in Hollywood at the time. What most South Park fans did not know was that Bergman was simultaneously one of Disney's most important voice performers. She voiced characters across numerous Disney animated productions, including Snow White and several Disney projects. Her Disney career required a squeaky clean public image, which is why she was credited on South Park under the alias Shannon Cassidy. Bergman could not afford to have her name publicly associated with a TVMA-rated show about foul-mouthed children while simultaneously voicing Disney princesses. On November 11, 1999, during the production of South Park's 3rd season, Mary Kay Bergman died. She had recently completed voice work for the theatrical film and had recorded dialogue for the show not long before her passing. Her death fundamentally changed the production of South Park. Her roles were first assumed by Eliza Schneider, who took over the bulk of the female voice work, and was sometimes credited under the pseudonym Blue Girl from her rock opera performances. Schneider voiced the characters from approximately 1999 through 2003. After Schneider's departure, the roles were split primarily between April Stewart, who was initially credited under the name Gracie Lazar, and Mona Marshall, who has voiced characters like Sheila Broflovsky and Linda Stotch from around 2000 to the present. This chain of pseudonyms created a shadow history of South Park's female voices that most fans never noticed. Because of Disney. Schneider hid behind because of Disney. Schneider hid behind her stage name. Stewart hid behind a completely fabricated identity. The real names behind these voices were invisible to casual viewers for years. The show never publicly addressed Bergman's death within an episode, but her loss echoed through the production for years, and the scramble to replace her voices is one of the most significant behind-the-scenes challenges in the show's history. Now let us talk about something that has been hiding in plain sight for the entire run of the show, what Kenny actually says in the theme song. The opening credits of South Park feature the boys singing along to the theme song composed and performed by Les Claypool of the band Primus. Most of the lyrics are clearly audible, but Kenny's lines are muffled just like his dialogue in the show itself. And those muffled lines are real. They are sexually explicit lyrics that Kenny is genuinely singing hidden behind his parka. The original version of Kenny's lyrics includes lines that reference, well, let us just say they involve anatomically specific descriptions of what Kenny likes about girls. The lyrics change every few seasons, and dedicated fans have spent years painstakingly deciphering each version by slowing down the audio, adjusting frequencies, and comparing across episodes. The theme song itself has gone through at least 5 major versions over the show's run. The original version from Season 1 through mid-Season 4 featured the classic Primus folk rock arrangement with call and response vocals between Claypool and the boys. The boys' vocals were actually re-recorded at a higher pitch during Season 3. Then came the 4th grade theme, a techno breakbeat remix. Then the bluegrass theme from Seasons 6 through 10, which had a twangy country feel. During Season 6, when Kenny was canonically dead, his lyrics were temporarily reassigned to Timmy Birch, who just shouted his own name. Then came the Wamola theme from Season 10 onward, a rock and metal remix featuring Claypool's custom electric bass instrument called the Wamola. Season 17 brought a 3D animated version of the opening sequence while retaining the Wamola instrumental. And in Season 25, the show recorded a full orchestral rendition that reincorporated uncensored Kenny lyrics. There were also special themes for specific episodes. The first 3 Halloween episodes used a distinct Halloween theme. The episode Basic Cable featured a James Bond-inspired theme. The pandemic specials and all Paramount Plus streaming events featured no intro or theme at all. The evolution of the theme song creates a subtle but detailed timeline within the show's production history, one that most viewers absorb subconsciously without ever consciously registering the changes. Still in the 3rd tier, let us talk about a piece of trivia from the very beginning of South Park that has fueled one of the longest-running fan theories in the show's history. The name swap in the original Spirit of Christmas short. In the 1992 Jesus vs. Frosty short, the 4 boys are clearly early prototypes of Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. But here's the strange part. The character called Kenny in the short physically resembles the later series version of Cartman. He is the heavier kid, not the one in the orange parka. And the boy who looks like the series version of Kenny is unnamed. Kenny, the Cartman-looking kid, is the first to be killed by the killer snowman. Then the unnamed Kenny-looking kid is also killed. The blood from both dead children pools together on the ground. This name swap has generated a persistent fan theory that has lasted for over 30 years. The theory goes like this: because Kenny and Cartman were originally swapped in the first short, there is a mystical or narrative connection between the 2 characters that persists throughout the series. This would explain why Cartman seems to be the only character who can consistently remember Kenny's deaths, even though the Mysterian trilogy explicitly states that nobody remembers. And there is evidence for this. In the Season 2 episode, City on the Edge of Forever, Cartman directly acknowledges that Kenny dies all the time. In the Season 6 episode, Cartman Land, he does it again. Both of these moments predate the Coon trilogy by years, and both contradict the later canonical explanation that nobody remembers Kenny's deaths. Parker and Stone have never confirmed or denied whether the name swap was intentional or whether Cartman's ability to remember Kenny's deaths is connected to it. Like many of South Park's deepest mysteries, it remains an open question, lurking at the bottom of the show's mythology. Now let us talk about how South Park actually looks, because the animation evolution of this show is a story in itself that spans 3 decades of technology. The pilot episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was Morikawa Odin was made using real construction paper. Trey Parker and Matt Stone literally cut out shapes from colored paper, arranged them on flat surfaces, and photographed them frame by frame using stop-motion techniques. This process took approximately 3 months to complete for a single 22-minute episode. If they had continued using this method, South Park would have been canceled after 1 season simply because they could never have produced episodes fast enough. Every episode after the pilot has been computer animated, but here is the key detail. The computer animation was specifically designed to replicate the crude, jerky, two-dimensional aesthetic of those original paper cutouts. The show is supposed to look handmade, it is supposed to look cheap and rough. That is not a limitation, that is a deliberate artistic choice inspired by Terry Gilliam's paper cutout animations from Monty Python's Flying Circus, which Parker has cited as a direct influence. The technology behind this look has changed dramatically over the years, even though the visual result has stayed remarkably consistent. In the early seasons, the production team digitized paper cutouts using scanners and animated them using Corel Draw and Alias Power Animator running on Silicon Graphics workstations. Starting with Season 5, the entire animation pipeline transitioned to Autodesk Maya, which is still the primary software used today. Modern visual effects are generated using Apple Motion. Season 13, which began in 2009, marked the switch to native 1080p high-definition production in 16:9 widescreen. But here is something most fans do not realize. The entire pre-2009 catalog, every episode from seasons 1 through 12, was later re-rendered from the original archived Maya and Power Animator scene files into full HD widescreen. This means the versions of early episodes streaming on Paramount Plus today look different from what originally aired. The compositions were adjusted, the resolution was upgraded, and the aspect ratio was changed from 4:3 to 16:9. If you watched South Park in the late 90s on a standard definition television, you saw a different show than what exists on streaming platforms now. This re-rendering was possible because the show has always been digital at its core, even when it was trying to look analog. Every character, every building, every background element exists as a digital file that can be re-exported at any resolution. It is one of the few advantages of producing a show that is intentionally designed to look simple. Still in the third tier, we need to discuss one of the most remarkable character arcs in animated television, the rise of Butters Stotch. Butters first appeared as an unnamed background character in the original pilot. He was just a face in the crowd, one of dozens of generic South Park elementary students with no dialogue and no identity. He was gradually developed starting in Season 3, receiving a name and occasional lines, but he was still firmly in the background. No one, including Parker and Stone, expected Butters to become anything important. Then Kenny died at the end of Season 5, and someone had to fill the void. Butters, along with a character named Tweak, replaced Kenny as the unofficial fourth friend for most of Season 6. And something unexpected happened. Parker and Stone discovered that writing for Butters was an absolute joy. His sweet, naive, endlessly optimistic personality created a perfect comedic contrast with the other boys, especially Cartman. Where Cartman was cruel and manipulative, Butters was trusting and kind. Where Cartman saw the worst in everyone, Butters assumed the best. Putting these two characters together produced some of the funniest scenes in the show's history. Butters was never planned to be a main character. The creators simply fell in love with writing him. He evolved from a blank slate background extra into one of the most complex and beloved figures in South Park. He developed a villainous alter ego called Professor Chaos. His parents became some of the show's most entertainingly awful adults, grounding him for increasingly absurd reasons. He was placed in foster care during The Poor Kid. He was sent to a camp designed to pray away the gay in Butters' very own episode. And through all of it, he maintained an innocent earnestness that made him impossible to dislike. The character is based on a real person. Butters is named after and modeled on Eric Stauff, South Park's animation director and a longtime friend of Parker and Stone. Stuff has worked on the show since its earliest days, and apparently his personality, or at least an exaggerated version of it, serves as the foundation for Butters' character. Given that Butters is one of the most lovable characters in animated television, that is quite a compliment. Now let us talk about the slow takeover that divided the South Park fanbase more than any other creative decision in the show's history: the rise of Randy Marsh. Randy Marsh started as a minor supporting character. He was Stan's dad, a geologist, the kind of background parent figure who showed up when the plot needed an adult to react to something. In early seasons, Randy had occasional spotlight moments, like when the town put him in charge of investigating spontaneous combustion because he was the best scientist in town, even though he is a geologist, and those are very different things. But as the series progressed, Randy became more and more prominent. His personality grew louder, more eccentric, more willing to throw himself into whatever absurd scheme the episode required. By the mid-seasons, Randy was arguably getting more screen time than any of the four boys. And by season 23, with the introduction of the Tegrity Farms marijuana storyline, Randy had effectively become the show's main character. This shift divided the fan base sharply. One camp loved Randy's chaotic energy and felt that his adult perspective allowed the show to engage with political and social satire more directly and more effectively than stories centered on 9-year-old boys could. The other camp felt that the show had fundamentally lost its identity by sidelining the four kids who were the entire reason South Park existed in the first place. Parker has acknowledged in interviews that writing for Randy is easier and more fun. An adult character can engage with topics like marijuana legalization, streaming wars, and pandemic response in ways that children simply cannot. Randy can start a weed farm. Randy can argue with his wife. Randy can run for office or start a business or get into a bar fight. The storytelling possibilities for an adult character in a satirical show are inherently broader than those for elementary school students. But the cost of that creative freedom was the marginalization of Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. For stretches of recent seasons, the four boys felt like supporting characters in their own show. The dynamic that had defined South Park for over 2 decades, four kids navigating a world of insane adults, was inverted. Now it was one insane adult navigating a world that was trying to keep up with him. Whether this shift was a natural evolution or a creative misstep depends entirely on which South Park fan you ask. But the fact that it is even debatable shows just how dramatically the show has changed since 4 construction paper kids stood at a bus stop in 1997. If you are enjoying this deep dive, make sure to subscribe. We are heading even further down the iceberg now. We have reached the 4th tier, hardcore fan territory. This is the information you only find if you have done dedicated research or spent years obsessively rewatching the show. And we are starting with the permanent deaths because while death is usually temporary in South Park, and there are exceptions, and those exceptions carry real weight precisely because the show normally treats death as impermanent. We already discussed Chef's death in detail. Isaac Hayes departed the show, and Chef was killed off in spectacularly brutal fashion in the season 10 premiere. But Chef is not the only character to have been permanently removed from the show through death. Pip Pirrup, the English exchange student who served as the show's version of the Charles Dickens character from Great Expectations, was killed during the events of 201 in season 14. His death was part of the chaotic climax of that episode and was never reversed. Ms. Veronica Crabtree, the perpetually angry school bus driver who screamed at the children every morning, was killed by a serial killer in season 8. Her death was played somewhat casually, fitting for a character who was never treated with much reverence, but it was permanent. Diane Choksondik, a teacher at South Park Elementary, whose name was itself a crude joke, died during season 6, under somewhat mysterious circumstances. Jack Tenderman, Scott Tenderman's father, and as we now know, Eric Cartman's biological father, was killed during the events of Scott Tenderman Must Die in season 5. His death was not shown on screen, but was confirmed within the episode when Cartman reveals that he had the Tenderman parents killed and processed into chili. And in one of the most significant permanent deaths in the show's mythology, Satan was killed by ManBearPig in season 22. The actual devil, who had been a recurring character since the first season, and who had appeared in the theatrical film as a sympathetic figure trapped in an abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein, was permanently killed off. We will talk more about the significance of ManBearPig and what it means for Al Gore's character arc later, because that story is one of the most fascinating examples of the show correcting its own mistakes. Beyond the well-known mainline South Park content, there exists a graveyard of video games that most fans have either forgotten about or never knew existed in the first place. Everyone knows about South Park, The Stick of Truth, and South Park, The Fractured But Whole, the two major role-playing games developed by Obsidian Entertainment and Ubisoft respectively, with direct creative involvement from Parker and Stone. These games were critically acclaimed and are considered among the best licensed video games ever made. But before those games, there were others. And they were not good. The very first South Park video game was released in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, PC, and PlayStation. It was a first-person shooter developed and published by Acclaim Entertainment. It was poorly received. The gameplay was repetitive, the controls were clunky, and the humor did not translate well to the gaming format. Then came South Park, Chef's Love Shack in 1999, a trivia and party game released for Dreamcast, PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and PC. Also by Acclaim, also poorly received. South Park Rally followed in 2000, a racing game in the vein of Mario Kart. Once again developed by Acclaim, once again met with negative reviews. There is a pattern here. But the truly obscure entries are the ones that never made it to market. A South Park game was in development for the Game Boy Color in 1998, but was canceled before release. The game remained unknown to the public until it was leaked online in 2014, giving fans their first look at a South Park game that was never meant to be seen. Even more mysterious is a Grand Theft Auto-style open-world South Park game that was being developed by a studio called Buzz Monkey Software. This game was never released, and very little is known about it. It exists as a ghost in South Park's gaming history, a project that was started, worked on to some unknown degree of completion, and then quietly shelved. Scott Tenorman, interestingly, appears as a significant figure in the gaming side of the franchise. He serves as a boss in the 2009 game South Park Let's Go, Tower Defense Play, and is the main antagonist of the 2012 game South Park Tenorman's Revenge. His role in the games extends his feud with Cartman beyond the television series into an entirely separate medium. Now, one of the most distinctive features of South Park compared to other animated shows is its approach to celebrity guest appearances. Most animated sitcoms treat celebrity cameos as events. A famous person shows up, voices themselves, or a special character, and the show promotes their appearance heavily. South Park does the exact opposite. The show has a deliberate anti-tradition when it comes to celebrity guests. When famous people do appear, they are almost always placed in intentionally demeaning or absurd roles designed to subvert the entire concept of celebrity ego. George Clooney, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, guest starred in the first season of South Park. His role was to bark. He provided the voice for Stan's dog, Sparky. No dialogue, just dog sounds. Clooney reportedly found this hilarious and was happy to participate. Jay Leno, who was hosting The Tonight Show at the time and was one of the most recognizable faces on television, provided meows for Cartman's cat. That was his entire contribution. Cat noises. Henry Winkler, beloved by a generation as the Fonz from Happy Days, voiced a kid-eating monster. He grunted and snarled. No words. Jerry Seinfeld was offered a role on the show. The role was Turkey Number 4 in a Thanksgiving episode. Seinfeld declined, which Parker and Stone have mentioned in interviews with apparent amusement. Radiohead voiced themselves in Scott Tenorman Must Die, but their appearance was specifically designed to mock a crying child. They show up at the end to call Scott Tenorman a crybaby while he sobs over eating his parents. The show has made a deliberate statement through these casting choices. Celebrity in South Park means nothing. Your fame does not earn you a better role. If anything, the more famous you are, the more absurd and diminishing your part will be. Elon Musk, PewDiePie, and Brad Paisley are among the few guests in later seasons who voiced themselves in relatively straightforward roles, but they are the exception rather than the rule. Now let us get into something that the show has never explicitly addressed, but that dedicated fans have tracked for decades: the way Trey Parker's personal life bleeds into the show's storylines. Stan Marsh is not just modeled after Trey Parker in personality. The connection runs much deeper than that. Stan shares Parker's birthday, the names of Stan's immediate family members, his parents Randy and Sharon, his sister Shelley, mirror the names of Parker's real family. Stan's catchphrase about things being pretty cool also appears in Parker's 1998 film Basketball, suggesting that Parker's personal verbal habits directly inform how he writes the character. But the most striking personal connection involves Cartman's mother, Leanne. Leanne Cartman is named after Trey Parker's former fiancée. According to multiple accounts, Parker's real-life Leanne cheated on him. Parker had already used the name Leanne earlier in his career, giving it to a horse in his 1993 film, Cannibal the Musical. But when it came time to name Cartman's mother in South Park, Parker chose the name again, this time for a character who would become the most notoriously promiscuous woman in the fictional town. Over the course of the series, Leanne Cartman has appeared in pornographic films within the show's universe. She has been described as a crack whore. She was the subject of a German Scheisse video. The season 1 twist that she was a hermaphrodite, later retconned, added yet another layer of humiliation to the character. She's depicted as sexually available to essentially any man in South Park, with her promiscuity being a running joke that has persisted for the entire run of the show. It is widely interpreted as one of the most sustained acts of creative revenge in television history. Parker took the name of the woman who hurt him and attached it to a character defined by her sexual promiscuity and her inability to control her son, who is the most morally reprehensible child on television. Every episode featuring Leanne Cartman is, in some reading, Parker processing his personal betrayal through satirical fiction. And it does not stop there. Season 23 featured multiple storylines dealing with marital dysfunction, including Butters and his Egyptian curse, Sharon and the kids hating Randy and wanting him to go to jail, and the boys dealing with broken friendships. Season 23 directly followed public reports of Trey Parker's real-life divorce. The show has always been autobiographical to some degree, but in moments like these, the personal and the fictional become almost indistinguishable. Still in the fourth tier, let us go deeper into the censorship of 201, because what actually happened behind the scenes is even more disturbing than what viewers saw on screen. When 200 aired, it featured the return of virtually every celebrity the show had ever parodied, all united in a class action lawsuit against South Park. The episode also brought back the controversy around depicting Muhammad, with various characters attempting to use Muhammad's supposed power of not being ridiculed for their own purposes. After the episode aired, Revolution Muslim, a New York-based radical organization, posted a statement on their website. The post included images of Theo van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker who was murdered by an extremist in 2004 for creating a film critical of Islam. The post also included the address of South Park Studios in Culver City, California. While the organization later claimed the post was not a direct threat, it was widely interpreted as one by media outlets, law enforcement, and Parker and Stone themselves. Comedy Central's response to 201 was dramatic, and according to Parker and Stone, went beyond what they had agreed to. The network inserted extensive audio bleeps throughout the episode, not just over references to Muhammad, but over the entire concluding speech, which had nothing to do with Muhammad at all. The speech reportedly contained the actual moral lesson of the two-part episode, a statement about the use of fear and intimidation to silence free expression. It was completely bleeped out. Parker and Stone have said in interviews that they were not consulted about the extent of the censorship and that they were unhappy with the result. The episode was also pulled from rotation immediately. It has never been re-aired. It was removed from Comedy Central's website, pulled from streaming platforms, and even omitted from certain international DVD releases. Region 4 DVD releases, which cover Australia, New Zealand, and parts of the Pacific, reportedly have the episode missing entirely. The uncensored version of 201 has never been officially released. Parker and Stone have expressed uncertainty about whether it ever will be. The original unbleeped audio presumably exists in the production archives at South Park Studios, but whether it will ever see the light of day remains one of the show's great open questions. The FBI reportedly provided personal security to Parker and Stone during the period following the threats. The incident had a visible chilling effect on the show's willingness to depict Muhammad in future episodes, though the show has continued to push boundaries on virtually every other topic imaginable. Now let us talk about another piece of censorship history, but one with a much funnier outcome: the South Park Stick of Truth video game censorship. The Stick of Truth, released in 2014, was a role-playing game that allowed players to experience South Park as an interactive adventure. The game included several scenes that proved too much for ratings boards in certain countries. An interactive alien anal probing sequence and an abortion minigame were deemed unacceptable for release in Australia, where the game was initially banned outright. Censored versions were eventually released for the Australian, European, and Israeli markets. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of simply cutting the offending scenes, the developers replaced them with static screens describing what was happening in text form. The Australian version featured a description narrated alongside an image of a crying koala. The European version used an image of Rodin's sculpture, The Thinker, while text described the censored action in deadpan detail. Parker and Stone reportedly found the censored descriptions significantly funnier than the actual gameplay sequences they replaced. The static screens became a talking point among gamers, with many arguing that the censorship improved the comedy rather than diminishing it. It was an accidental joke that worked better than the intentional one. Before we move on, let us quickly cover the format-breaking episodes, because South Park has occasionally abandoned its standard animation style entirely. And these episodes represent some of the most technically ambitious work in the show's history. Make Love Not Warcraft from Season 10 is probably the most famous example. The episode used machinima, which means it was filmed extensively within the actual World of Warcraft game engine. Real World of Warcraft footage was captured and integrated with the show's standard animation, creating a hybrid visual style that had never been attempted on television before. The episode won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. Good Times with Weapons from Season 8 featured extensive sequences animated in stylized Japanese anime format, complete with dramatic camera angles, speed lines, and exaggerated action choreography. The anime sequences were deliberately high quality, creating a stark contrast with the show's normally crude aesthetic. Major Boobage from Season 12 employed heavy rotoscoping techniques to emulate the visual style of the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal. The sequences were painstakingly detailed and represented a dramatic departure from the show's usual look. Woodland Critter Christmas from Season 8 used a narrated fairy tale format with a cheerful storybook aesthetic that gradually revealed itself to be one of the most disturbing episodes in the show's history, involving satanic woodland animals performing blood rituals. These format-breaking episodes demonstrate the remarkable flexibility of South Park's animation pipeline. Because the show runs on Maya and can be produced in 6 days, the team has the technical capability to experiment with radically different visual styles when the story demands it. Most animated shows are locked into a single visual format for their entire run. South Park can become an anime, a machinima, a rotoscope tribute, or a fairy tale whenever it wants to. If you're still with me, subscribe, because we are heading into the abyss now. This is the 5th tier of the iceberg, the abyss. We are deep now. These are the stories and details that only the most obsessive fans and production historians know about. The kind of information that requires digging through old DVD commentaries, obscure interviews, leaked production details, and archived web pages from the early 2000s. And we are starting with one of the strangest production disasters in South Park history, the 2013 power outage. On October 1st, 2013, South Park Studios in Culver City, California experienced a significant power outage. For most television productions, a power outage is an inconvenience. For South Park, it was a catastrophe, because every episode is produced in approximately 6 days, and because the finished product often arrives at Comedy Central just hours before air, there is virtually no margin for error. The 6-day cycle leaves no buffer, no backup episode sitting in a vault, no weeks of padding between completion and broadcast. The power outage occurred during the production of the Season 17 premiere, titled Let Go, Let Gov. The loss of electricity knocked out the animation workstations, the rendering farm, the editing suites, and everything else the production team needed to finish the episode. The premiere had to be pushed back by a full week. A rerun of a previous episode aired in its place. This was an unprecedented event in South Park's history. In 16 seasons of operating under the 6-day production model, the team had never once missed a deadline. They had come close. There were stories of episodes being transmitted to Comedy Central at the absolute last possible moment, with the satellite uplink completing minutes before broadcast. But they had always delivered. The power outage broke that streak, and it served as a stark reminder of just how fragile the 6-day model really is. The irony is that the episode they were trying to finish, Let Go, Let Gov, was a satire of the NSA surveillance revelations by Edward Snowden. The government was monitoring everything, and meanwhile, a simple loss of electricity brought the most efficient production operation in animated television to its knees. Parker and Stone were reportedly furious, not at the power company, but at the situation itself. The entire production model depends on an unbroken chain of events executing perfectly across 6 consecutive days. Remove any single link in that chain, whether it is a power outage, a network malfunction, a rendering failure, or a creator's illness, and the whole thing collapses. It is a system designed for speed at the expense of redundancy. The 2013 outage was a warning shot. The model would face an even more dramatic failure over a decade later, in 2025, when the team actually missed a production deadline entirely and had to issue a public apology. But that story is even deeper in the iceberg. Now let us return to Mary Kay Bergman, because there is a layer to her story that most South Park fans have never heard, her Disney secret. We discussed earlier that Bergman voiced the vast majority of South Park's female characters during the show's first 3 seasons. But what we did not fully explore is the extraordinary double life she was living during that period. At the same time that she was recording vulgar dialogue for Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, and dozens of other South Park characters, Bergman was one of Disney's most trusted voice performers. She voiced Snow White in multiple Disney productions and video games, carrying the legacy of the original 1937 character into new media. She also performed in other Disney and family-oriented projects that required a spotless public image. This created an impossible professional contradiction. Bergman could not be publicly associated with South Park, a show rated TVMA that featured extreme vulgarity, graphic violence, and subjects that were the polar opposite of the Disney brand. To solve this problem, she was credited on South Park under the pseudonym Shannon Cassidy. The name Shannon Cassidy does not exist as a real person. It was a fabrication created specifically to shield Bergman's Disney career from her South Park work. For the first 3 seasons of the show, viewers, critics, and even most people in the industry had no idea that the woman voicing Snow White for Disney was the same person screaming profanities as Leanne Cartman on Comedy Central. Bergman's voice work for South Park was not minor. She performed the majority of the show's female voices, creating distinct characterizations for women who range from concerned mothers to hyperactive schoolgirls to elderly townspeople. She did this while simultaneously maintaining her Disney workload and various other voice acting commitments. The sheer volume of work she was handling across these contradictory professional worlds was remarkable. When Bergman passed away in November 1999, her death created an immediate crisis at South Park Studios. There was no understudy, there was no backup plan. One woman had been performing nearly every female voice on the show, and she was gone. The scramble to replace her, first with Eliza Schneider, and later with April Stewart and Mona Marshall, took months to resolve, and the transition is audible to careful listeners who compare episodes from before and after the change. Now let us talk about the money, the really big money. In July 2021, Paramount Plus, the streaming arm of Viacom CBS, signed a deal with Trey Parker and Matt Stone that was valued at approximately $900 million. This deal covered new episodes of South Park and a series of streaming-exclusive specials and films. At the time, it was one of the largest contracts in television history for a single property. But that was just the beginning. In July 2025, Paramount renewed the deal with a contract valued at approximately $1.5 billion total. The new agreement guarantees the production of 50 additional episodes that will carry South Park through at least the 2029 to 2030 television season. When all commitments are fulfilled, Parker and Stone will have been producing South Park for over 3 decades under continuous contract. To put this in perspective, $1.5 billion is more than what most major film franchises generate in their entire theatrical run. It is a staggering commitment to a show that was created by 2 college students using construction paper in 1992. The deal reflects Paramount's belief that South Park remains one of the most valuable properties in all of entertainment, both for its ongoing episodes and for its massive streaming back catalog. Parker and Stone have also expanded the South Park brand in other directions. 2 streaming exclusive specials, The Streaming Wars and The Streaming Wars. Part 2 aired in 2022 and directly satirized the cutthroat competition between Paramount Plus, Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and other platforms, including the very platform that was paying for the specials to exist. Additional streaming specials have included Post-COVID, The Return of COVID, The End of Obesity, and others that have expanded the show's storytelling beyond the traditional 22-minute format. The streaming wars in the real world have had a tangible impact on the show's availability. South Park originally streamed its back catalog for free on South Park Studios' own website, with full episodes available to anyone with an internet connection. Then the rights moved to Hulu in 2014 under an exclusive streaming deal. Then the 2021 Paramount deal pulled the catalog from Hulu and moved it to HBO Max for library episodes and Paramount Plus for new content and specials. This fragmentation has made it significantly harder for viewers to access the complete South Park library in one place, which is exactly the kind of corporate absurdity the show itself has satirized. Now, still in the 5th tier, let us talk about something most fans do not know. Parker and Stone hated Season 2. Not disliked, not felt ambivalent about, actively hated. In DVD commentary tracks for Season 2, both creators have expressed deep dissatisfaction with the majority of episodes they produced that year. They have described the season as the result of burnout, inexperience, and the pressure of suddenly being responsible for one of the most popular shows on television after having essentially no professional track record before the pilot. Season 1 of South Park was a cultural phenomenon. It debuted to massive ratings, generated a merchandising empire, and turned Parker and Stone into overnight celebrities. When Season 2 began production, the two of them were exhausted, overwhelmed, and struggling with the realization that they now had to produce 20-odd episodes per season for a show that the entire country was watching. The result, according to their own assessment, was a season full of episodes they consider among the weakest in the show's history. Several episodes were produced under extreme time pressure with scripts that Parker and Stone felt were underdeveloped. The comedy was broader, the satire was less focused, and the overall quality was inconsistent. This matters because it establishes a pattern that would repeat throughout the show's run. South Park has always been a show that lives and dies by the energy and enthusiasm of its creators. When Parker and Stone are fired up and passionate about a topic, the show produces some of the best episodes in television history. When they are burned out, distracted by other projects, or going through personal difficulties, the show noticeably suffers. Season 2 was the first time this dynamic manifested, but it would not be the last. Speaking of the show's quality fluctuations, let us talk about a piece of international South Park history that most Western fans have never heard of: the India ban. In 2010, the Indian Ministry of Broadcasting imposed a ban on South Park. The ban was reportedly related to the show's content being deemed inappropriate for Indian broadcast standards, though the specific episodes that triggered the ban have never been officially confirmed. The ban remained in effect for approximately 9 years, until it was lifted in 2019. During those 9 years, South Park was completely unavailable through legal channels in India. It could not be broadcast on Indian cable or satellite television, and it was not available on Indian streaming platforms. Indian fans who wanted to watch the show had to resort to unofficial means, downloading episodes from file-sharing sites or using VPN services to access foreign streaming platforms. The ban's timing was interesting because it occurred during a period when India's media landscape was rapidly expanding and modernizing. While the rest of the world was debating which streaming platform had the rights to South Park's back catalog, Indian audiences were locked out entirely. When the ban was finally lifted in 2019, it coincided with the broader expansion of international streaming services into the Indian market. Now here is a story that illustrates just how scrappy and unconventional South Park's production has always been, and it involves Adrien Beard. We mentioned earlier that Beard voices Tolken Black and that he got the role because he was the only black person working at South Park Studios when Parker needed someone to voice the character. But the full context of that story is even more revealing. Adrien Beard is not primarily a voice actor, he is a production supervisor and storyboard artist. He has been part of the South Park production team since the show's early days, working behind the scenes on the technical and artistic side of episode creation. When Parker needed a voice for Tolkien, he did not hold auditions or bring in professional voice talent. He walked down the hall, found the one black employee in the building, and said essentially, "Hey, can you do this?" Beard agreed. He has now been voicing the character for well over 2 decades, across approximately 78 episodes. He is simultaneously a key member of the animation team and one of the show's most recognizable voice performers. This kind of dual role is practically unheard of in professional animation, where voice actors and production staff are almost always separate people. The story perfectly encapsulates the spirit of South Park's production. It is a show that has always valued speed, practicality, and the good enough approach over polish and process. If the person you need for a voice is literally sitting in the next office, why waste time holding auditions? This philosophy extends to every aspect of how the show is made, and it is both the source of its greatest strengths and its occasional weaknesses. Now let us discuss what many fans consider the lowest point in South Park's creative history. Season 20. Season 20 aired in 2016, coinciding with the contentious presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Parker and Stone made the creative decision to fully serialize the season, abandoning the mostly standalone episode format that had defined the show for nearly 2 decades. Every episode would connect to the next. Every storyline would build across the entire season. Character arcs would span multiple episodes. Plot threads would interweave and culminate in a unified season finale. The experiment was a disaster. The season centered around 3 major storylines. An online troll called Skank Hunt 42, who turned out to be Kyle's father, Gerald. A rivalry between Cartman and a girl named Heidi Turner. And a storyline involving member berries, which were sentient berry creatures that fed on people's nostalgia, and were somehow connected to the rise of Mr. Garrison's presidential campaign, which was a fictionalized stand-in for Donald Trump's real-world candidacy. The serialization created several problems that became increasingly obvious as the season progressed. Individual episodes lost their standalone punch because nothing was resolved within a single installment. Viewers who missed an episode were completely lost. The pacing became uneven because the show was trying to maintain multiple ongoing narratives simultaneously, while still delivering topical commentary within each episode's 6-day production window. And then the election happened. Parker and Stone, along with most of the entertainment industry and the political polling world, had been operating under the assumption that Hillary Clinton would win the 2016 presidential election. The season 20 storylines had been designed with this outcome in mind. When Donald Trump won instead, the season's carefully constructed narrative arcs were thrown into chaos. The team had to rewrite significant portions of the back half of the season in real time. Plot threads that were leading somewhere had to be rerouted. Character arcs that depended on a specific electoral outcome had to be hastily revised. The result was a season finale that felt rushed, confused, and unsatisfying, failing to deliver on the promises the earlier episodes had set up. Season 20 holds a 54% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is by far the lowest in the show's history. Many fans consider it the nadir of South Park, the moment when the show lost its creative footing most dramatically. The failure of Season 20 led Parker and Stone to pull back significantly from full serialization in subsequent seasons, returning to a more episodic format with only occasional multi-episode arcs. The lesson of Season 20 is one that South Park ultimately learned and internalized. The show works best when each episode functions as a self-contained unit of satire that can be written, produced, and aired in 6 days in response to whatever is happening in the world that particular week. Serialization requires planning ahead, and planning ahead contradicts the show's fundamental creative DNA. South Park thrives on spontaneity. Lock it into a predetermined narrative structure, and it loses the very thing that makes it special. If you are still here and you are still awake, give the video a like. We have come incredibly far, but there are still 2 more tiers to go, and the deepest entries are the ones almost nobody talks about. We have reached the 6th tier of the iceberg, the Huddle Zone. We are now deeper than most fans have ever gone. These are the details that come from production archives, deleted content, behind-the-scenes relationships, and narrative connections that took years of careful observation to identify. Settle in. Let us start by going even further into one of the show's most enduring mysteries. What does Kenny actually say when he talks? We know that Kenny's muffled dialogue is real. Matt Stone voices the character by pressing his hand or sleeve over his mouth and speaking actual lines. The other voice actors on the show can hear what he's saying during recording sessions, and they react to it naturally, which is why characters in the show sometimes respond to Kenny's garbled speech with horror or laughter. They are reacting to real jokes that the audience cannot clearly hear. The content of Kenny's dialogue is almost always vulgar. He makes sexual references, describes bodily functions, and says things that would never pass broadcast standards if they were audible. In early seasons, his muffled lines were relatively simple. Crude jokes about girls, bathroom humor, the kind of stuff a 9-year-old boy might whisper to his friends when adults are not listening. But as the series progressed, Kenny's hidden dialogue became more elaborate and more outrageous. Dedicated fans have spent years isolating and amplifying Kenny's audio using spectral analysis, frequency shifting, and audio isolation software. Community forums like the South Park Wiki and various Reddit communities maintain detailed transcriptions of Kenny's dialogue across dozens of episodes. Some of these transcriptions are agreed upon by the community. Others remain hotly debated, with different listeners hearing different words in the same muffled audio. There is a beautiful irony to this. Kenny is arguably the most mysterious character on the show, and his mystery is entirely acoustic. Every piece of information about his inner world is technically available to every viewer. It is just filtered through fabric and mumbling. The audience has to work to hear what Kenny thinks, and most never bother, which means Kenny's real personality, his actual thoughts and observations, exists in a kind of hidden layer of the show that only the most dedicated fans ever access. In a few rare episodes, Kenny speaks without his hood. When he does, his voice is normal, and the things he says are often surprisingly thoughtful or emotional. These moments are treated as events within the show, precisely because they are so rare. Kenny unhooded is like a curtain being pulled back on a character who has been speaking behind a wall for decades. Now let us dig deeper into the Cartman-Kenny name swap theory, because the implications extend far beyond a simple trivia error in a student film. We discussed earlier that in the 1992 Jesus Versus, Frosty Short, the names Kenny and Cartman were applied to different character designs than the ones that would eventually appear in the series. The heavier boy was called Kenny. The boy in the orange parka-like outfit was unnamed. When the 1995 Jesus vs. Santa short was produced, the names were reassigned to match their final series configurations. This swap could be dismissed as a simple revision. Parker and Stone were still developing the characters and had not locked down their identities. The names shifted because the creators changed their minds. End of story. But here's why fans refuse to let it go. There are moments throughout the series, scattered across multiple seasons, where Cartman appears to remember Kenny's deaths. This directly contradicts the canon established in the season 14 Mysterian trilogy, which explicitly states that no one remembers. In Cartman Land from season 5, Cartman makes a casual reference to Kenny dying. In City on the Edge of Forever from season 2, a flashback sequence shows Cartman remembering Kenny dying in a previous episode, even though none of the other characters recall it. The theory posits that because Cartman and Kenny were originally the same character, or at least occupied the same narrative slot in the Proto-South Park shorts, they share a metaphysical connection that transcends the normal rules of the show's universe. Cartman can remember Kenny's deaths because, on some fundamental level, they are linked. This theory also connects to the season 6 storyline where Kenny's ashes possessed Cartman's body. If Cartman and Kenny share some kind of spiritual link, it would explain why Kenny's consciousness was able to inhabit Cartman specifically, rather than any other character. The ashes could have been consumed by anyone, but it was Cartman who drank them, and it was Cartman's body that Kenny's spirit chose to occupy. Parker and Stone have never commented on this theory directly. They have never confirmed a deliberate connection between the name swap and Cartman's apparent ability to remember deaths. But they have also never denied it, and the evidence, scattered across decades of episodes, continues to accumulate. Now let us explore something that has flown almost completely under the radar of mainstream fandom: Kenny's possession abilities. We touched on this earlier, but let us go deeper. In the season 6 episode, A Ladder to Heaven, Cartman drinks a mixture that, unbeknownst to him, contains Kenny's cremated ashes. He believes it is a chocolate milk mix. After consuming the ashes, Cartman begins experiencing Kenny's memories and personality. He starts speaking in Kenny's voice. He makes references that only Kenny would know. His behavior changes in ways that alarm his friends. This possession arc continues across multiple episodes, culminating in The Biggest Douche in the Universe, where Cartman undergoes a full-blown exorcism performed by Chef and a group of elders. Kenny's spirit is expelled from Cartman's body and ascends, presumably returning to whatever metaphysical holding pattern he occupies between deaths and rebirths. The implications of this are significant. Kenny can inhabit other people. His consciousness does not require his own physical body to persist. His spirit can survive the destruction of his body and enter someone else through the consumption of his remains. This means Kenny's immortality is not just physical regeneration, it is something closer to true spiritual indestructibility. Even when his body is destroyed and cremated, his consciousness continues to exist in a form capable of possessing the living. Connect this to the Cthulhu mythology established in Season 14, and a picture emerges of Kenny as something far more than a running gag. He is a vessel for eldritch power, cursed with an immortality that operates on rules the show has never fully explained, and that Kenny himself does not fully understand. There is also the question of what happens during the period between Kenny's death and his rebirth. The show has established that Kenny goes somewhere when he dies. In the movie, he goes to hell and later ascends to heaven. But the Cthulhu connection implies that his death cycle might involve passing through realms associated with the Lovecraftian mythos, dimensions of existence that are entirely outside the normal spiritual framework of heaven and hell that the show has established. Kenny's possession of Cartman raises another question. If Kenny can possess people through his ashes, what happens to the ashes that are not consumed? Are they inert? Or does some fragment of Kenny's consciousness remain in every particle of his remains until his full rebirth occurs? The show has never addressed this, but the possibility opens up genuinely unsettling narrative territory. Moving on in the Hadal Zone, let us talk about the Halloween episodes and their hidden musical detail. The first 3 Halloween episodes of South Park, Pink Eye from Season 1, Spooky Fish from Season 2, and Korn's groovy Pirate Ghost Mystery from Season 3, each featured a distinct variation of the opening theme song. These were not the standard seasonal theme changes that occurred throughout the show's run. They were specific Halloween-themed arrangements created exclusively for these episodes. The Halloween themes incorporated minor key variations, spooky sound effects, and altered instrumentation that gave the familiar opening a distinctly eerie quality. After Season 3, the practice was discontinued. No subsequent Halloween episodes received their own unique theme arrangement. This means that the first 3 Halloweens of South Park exist in a small, exclusive musical universe that was never revisited. If you watch these 3 episodes in sequence, you experience a progressive evolution of the Halloween theme that builds across the first 3 years of the show and then simply stops. It is a tiny, almost invisible piece of South Park's artistic history that vanished before most fans even noticed it existed. Now let us go deeper into the Liane Cartman story, because the real-life connection extends beyond just the name. We established that Liane Cartman is named after Trey Parker's former fiancée, and that the character's extreme promiscuity is widely interpreted as Parker processing his personal betrayal through fiction. But the connection goes back further than South Park itself. In 1993, before South Park existed as a television show, Trey Parker wrote and directed a micro-budget film called Cannibal, the musical, originally titled Alfred Packer, the Musical. The film was a comedic retelling of the true story of Alfred Packer, a prospector who was accused of cannibalism during an ill-fated expedition in the Colorado mountains in 1874. In Cannibal, the musical, there's a horse named Liane. The horse is Parker's character's beloved companion, the one thing he cares about most in the world. At a critical point in the film, the horse leaves. It runs away and never comes back. Parker's character is devastated. According to Parker's friends and collaborators, the horse's departure was a direct metaphor for the real Leon's betrayal. Parker was processing the end of that relationship through the film, even before South Park existed. The name appeared first as a horse that abandons its owner, and then later as a mother whose defining characteristic is sexual infidelity. This means the Leanne Cartman character carries nearly 30 years of personal weight. She is not just a satirical creation, she is a recurring manifestation of a real emotional wound, one that first appeared in a 1993 student film and has been evolving through Parker's work ever since. Every time Leanne Cartman appears on screen, every joke about her promiscuity, every reference to her sexual adventures carries an autobiographical dimension that most viewers will never be aware of. Now let us talk about one of the most remarkable character redemption arcs in the show's history, ManBearPig and the Vindication of Al Gore. ManBearPig first appeared in Season 10, Episode 6, ManBearPig. In this episode, former Vice President Al Gore comes to South Park trying to warn everyone about the existence of ManBearPig, a creature he describes as being half man, half bear, and half pig. Nobody takes him seriously. The entire episode treats Gore as a buffoon, a self-important narcissist so desperate for attention that he has invented an imaginary monster to justify his continued relevance. The episode was clearly a satire of Al Gore's climate change advocacy. Parker and Stone, who have generally resisted aligning with any particular political position, were lampooning what they perceived as Gore's tendency to use fear-mongering and self-promotion to advance his environmental message. ManBearPig was climate change, rendered as a ridiculous monster and that only a delusional ex-politician could believe in. For 12 years, this was the show's position on Al Gore. He was a punchline. Then came Season 22. In the two-part episodes, Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, ManBearPig returned, but this time the creature was real. It was not a figment of Gore's imagination. It was a genuine, terrifying monster that had been given power through a deal the town of South Park had made decades earlier in exchange for cheap cars, ice cream, and other consumer luxuries. ManBearPig was now explicitly a metaphor for climate change as a real and present danger, and the episode acknowledged that the town, and by extension the show itself, had been wrong to ignore Gore's warnings. The two-parter was a genuine mea culpa. It was South Park admitting, through the language of its own mythology, that its earlier dismissal of climate change concerns had been a mistake. Gore was vindicated within the show's narrative. The characters who had mocked him were forced to confront the consequences of their denial. And ManBearPig killed Satan. This is a detail that many viewers miss because of how quickly it happens, but it is extraordinarily significant within the show's mythology. Satan, the literal devil, who had been a recurring character since the first season and a major character in the theatrical film, was permanently killed by ManBearPig during the Season 22 storyline. The implication was clear. Climate change, represented by ManBearPig, is more destructive than the devil himself. Satan's death was permanent. He has not returned since. The show killed off one of its longest-running supernatural characters specifically to illustrate the severity of the threat that ManBearPig represents. When you consider that the same show once treated that threat as a joke, the narrative weight of Satan's death becomes even more significant. The ManBearPig redemption arc is one of the most surprising and mature creative decisions in South Park's history. It demonstrated that the show, despite its reputation for irreverence and both sides-ism, was capable of genuine self-reflection and course correction. Parker and Stone looked at what they had said about climate change a decade earlier, decided they had been wrong, and used their own show to publicly acknowledge that mistake. Now, before we go to the final tier, let us discuss one of the strangest accolades in South Park's history, the Peabody Award paradox. In 2005, South Park received a George Foster Peabody Award, one of the most prestigious honors in broadcasting. The Peabody is often described as the broadcast equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize. Past recipients include Walter Cronkite, 60 Minutes, The Wire, and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The award recognized South Park for its postmodern comedic commentary on the fundamental absurdities of American life. The paradox is this. At the time it received the Peabody Award, South Park also held, or would soon hold, the Guinness World Record for the most profanity in an animated series. The same show that was recognized for its journalistic-level social commentary was also the single most profane animated program ever broadcast. These two facts are not contradictory, and that is exactly the point. South Park's power has always come from its willingness to say things that no other show on television would dare to say, using language and imagery that would be unacceptable in any other context. The profanity is not separate from the commentary. It is the delivery mechanism for the commentary. The show's vulgarity is what allows it to reach audiences who would never watch a traditional satirical news program. It wraps its analysis of American absurdity in a package of foul-mouthed children and animated violence. And the result is something that reaches people in a way that more respectable programming simply cannot. The Peabody Committee understood this. Their recognition of South Park was an acknowledgement that meaningful cultural criticism can come from unexpected and even uncomfortable places. A show where an 8-year-old feeds his enemy's parents to him in chili form can also be one of the most incisive commentaries on American society ever produced. Those two things coexist, and pretending they cannot is exactly the kind of cultural snobbery that South Park exists to tear apart. We have made it to the final tier of the iceberg, the trench, the absolute deepest level. This is the information that even dedicated fans who run South Park wikis and discussion forums might not know. Production secrets, behind-the-scenes conflicts, hidden creative influences, and the current state of a show that has been on the air for over a quarter of a century. And we are starting with one of the most recent entries on this iceberg, the Season 27 production apology. In 2025, something happened that had never happened before in the entire 28-year history of South Park. The production team missed a deadline so completely that they had to issue a public apology. We talked earlier about the 2013 power outage that delayed the season 17 premiere by 1 week. That was an external event, a loss of electricity that disrupted an otherwise functional production pipeline. What happened in 2025 was different. The team simply ran out of time. The 6-day cycle, which had been pushed to its absolute limits for over 2 decades, finally broke under its own weight. The details of exactly what went wrong have not been fully disclosed. What is publicly known is that the production team was unable to complete an episode within the required window, and rather than air an unfinished product, they chose to delay and issue a statement to fans acknowledging the failure. Parker and Stone apologized publicly. This event sent shockwaves through the South Park fan base. Not because one delayed episode is a catastrophe in the grand scheme of things, but because it represented a crack in the show's foundational myth. The 6-day cycle was always presented as superhuman, a feat of creative and logistical prowess that no other show in television could match. For that system to fail, even once, suggested that the pace Parker and Stone have maintained for decades might finally be catching up with them, and when you consider their ages, it makes sense. Parker was born in 1969, Stone was born in 1971. They have been making the show since their mid-20s. They are now in their mid-50s. The 120-hour work weeks that they pulled during the early seasons are not physically sustainable forever. The human body has limits, even when the creative spirit does not. The Season 27 apology was a small moment in the broader history of South Park, but it carried enormous symbolic weight. It was the first concrete public acknowledgement that the production model might be reaching the end of its viability, or at least that it requires more flexibility than it once did. Now let us discuss someone whose contributions to South Park have been almost entirely erased from public awareness: Toddy Walters. Toddy Walters, whose full name is listed in some credits as Toddy, voiced several characters during South Park's earliest seasons, approximately seasons 1 through 3. She is credited in a handful of episodes, though the exact number and the specific character she voiced have been the subject of some debate among production historians. What is known is that Walters had a falling out with the production at some point during or after the third season. The nature of this conflict has never been publicly detailed by any of the parties involved. Parker and Stone have not discussed it in interviews. Walters has not spoken about it publicly to any significant degree. The silence around the situation has only deepened the mystery. What happened between Toddy Walters and the South Park production team? Was it a creative disagreement, a personal conflict, a business dispute? The answer is unknown, and the absence of information has turned Walters into one of the most enigmatic figures in the show's history. She exists in the credits of a handful of early episodes and then vanishes, replaced by the succession of voice actresses who followed Mary Kay Bergman's death. The timing of Walters' departure roughly coincides with the period following Bergman's passing, which means the production was dealing with multiple voice cast disruptions simultaneously. Bergman's death, Walters' departure, and the onboarding of replacement actresses all occurred within a relatively narrow window, creating a period of significant upheaval in the vocal landscape of the show. This is the kind of story that exists in the gaps between public knowledge and private history. The full truth may never come out, and it may not need to. But for completeness, any deep dive into South Park's history should acknowledge that Toddy Walters existed, contributed, and then disappeared under circumstances that remain unexplained. Now here is a story that will genuinely surprise many fans: Bill Hader's secret influence on South Park. Bill Hader is best known as a cast member of Saturday Night Live from 2005 to 2013, and as the star and creator of Barry on HBO. He is one of the most acclaimed comedy performers of his generation. What most people do not know is that Hader was a consulting writer on South Park for 16 episodes across the 2008 and 2009 seasons. Hader did not write full episodes. His role was as a consulting writer and creative collaborator, sitting in the writer's room with Parker and Stone, contributing jokes, suggesting storylines, and helping shape the comedic direction of episodes during one of the show's strongest creative periods. His contributions span parts of seasons 12 and 13, which include episodes like The China Program, Breast Cancer Show Ever, Margaritaville, Fish Sticks, and The Coon. Fish Sticks in particular has been cited in multiple interviews as an episode that benefited significantly from Hader's involvement. The episode, which centers on a simple joke about fish sticks and Kanye West's inability to understand it, is considered one of the funniest South Park episodes of the late 2000s. Its sharp comedic timing and escalating absurdity bear the fingerprints of Hader's sensibility. Hader has spoken openly about his admiration for Parker and Stone and has described his time in the South Park writer's room as one of the most creatively intense experiences of his career. He has noted that watching Parker work, specifically the speed and confidence with which Parker writes and rewrites material, was a formative experience that influenced his own approach to comedy writing. The revelation that Hader was involved in South Park recontextualizes a specific era of the show's output. Seasons 12 and 13 are generally regarded as part of the show's second golden period, a creative resurgence that followed some weaker seasons in the mid-2000s. Knowing that Hader was in the room during this period suggests that his presence had a tangible positive effect on the show's quality. It also raises questions about other uncredited collaborators who may have passed through the South Park writer's room over the years. Parker has always been the primary creative force behind the show, writing and directing the vast majority of episodes. But the existence of consulting writers like Hader suggests that the creative process is more collaborative than the public narrative implies. Now let us talk about money again, but from the other direction. How little it cost to make South Park in the beginning. When South Park debuted in 1997, each episode was produced on a budget of approximately $250,000 to $300,000. This was extraordinarily cheap by the standards of primetime animated television. For comparison, The Simpsons was reportedly costing approximately $1.5 million per episode during the same period. Family Guy, which debuted in 1999, had a similarly high per-episode budget. South Park's low cost was a direct result of its deliberately simple animation style and its small production team. The characters are geometric shapes, the backgrounds are flat, the movements are limited and intentionally jerky. There are no complex camera movements, no elaborate lighting setups, no intricate character designs that require dozens of animators to bring to life. Everything about the show's visual identity was designed for speed and efficiency, and those design choices had the secondary benefit of keeping production costs remarkably low. This economic efficiency gave South Park a level of creative freedom that more expensive shows could not match. If an episode of The Simpsons flopped, it represented $1.5 million investment that produced no return. If an episode of South Park flopped, the financial loss was a fraction of that amount. Parker and Stone could afford to take risks, to experiment with controversial topics, to air episodes that might alienate portions of their audience, because the financial consequences of failure were much smaller. The budget has grown substantially since those early days, though exact current figures are not publicly available. The move to HD production, the expansion of the animation team, and the general inflation of television production costs have all pushed the per-episode budget upward. But relative to its peers in primetime animation, South Park remains one of the most cost-effective shows on television. This cost efficiency is one of the reasons the show has survived for 28 seasons. It is cheap enough to produce that even modest ratings generate significant profit for the network. Combined with its massive merchandising revenue and streaming library value, South Park has been a financial juggernaut for Paramount, Comedy Central, and every other entity that has held a piece of the franchise over the years. Now let us discuss a structural change that has fundamentally altered the rhythm of South Park in its most recent seasons: the compression from full seasons to abbreviated runs. For most of its history, South Park produced seasons of varying length, typically ranging from 14 to 18 episodes per season. Season 2 had 18 episodes, seasons 3 through 5 had 17 each. The standard settled around 14 episodes per season for much of the show's middle run. Starting with season 25 in 2022, however, the episode count dropped significantly. Season 25 had only 6 episodes, season 26 had 6, season 27 had 6, season 28, which began airing in October 2025, consists of 5 episodes released on a bi-weekly schedule, meaning 1 new episode every 2 weeks rather than weekly. This compression represents a dramatic departure from the show's historical output. A 6-episode season is less than half the length of a traditional South Park season. A 5-episode season is even shorter. For a show that built its reputation on responding to current events in near real time with weekly episodes, the shift to bi-weekly 6-episode runs fundamentally changes the creative equation. There are several reasons for this compression. The Paramount Plus deal shifted some of the show's content from traditional seasons to streaming exclusive specials and films, redistributing the total output across multiple formats. Parker and Stone's ages and the physical toll of the 6-day production cycle likely play a role as well. And the evolving economics of television, where shorter seasons are increasingly common across the industry, have created an environment where 6-episode runs are not unusual. But for fans who remember when South Park could produce 17 or 18 episodes in a single season, the current 5-episode bi-weekly format feels sparse. The show has less time to develop storylines, less room for experimental episodes, and fewer opportunities to respond to the rapid pace of news and culture. Whether this compression ultimately benefits the show by allowing Parker and Stone to focus their energy on fewer, higher quality episodes, or whether it diminishes the show by reducing its output below a critical threshold, is a question that only time will answer. Now let us bring this iceberg right up to the present moment with the most recent episodes of South Park. Season 28 began airing on October 29, 2025 with the episode Boo Boo's a Dinosaur. The season has been released on a bi-weekly schedule, with episodes airing every other Wednesday on Comedy Central. As of early December 2025, the season consists of 5 episodes. The most recent episode, The Crap Out, aired on December 10th, 2025. It drew approximately 0.46 million viewers in its initial broadcast, continuing a long-term trend of declining linear television ratings that affects virtually every cable program, not just South Park. Linear viewership numbers no longer tell the complete story of a show's audience, since a significant and growing portion of South Park's viewership comes through streaming, on-demand, and DVR playback. But the raw linear numbers are a fraction of what the show drew during its peak in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when new episodes regularly attracted millions of viewers on their first airing. The season 28 episodes continue the show's recent approach of mixing standalone satire with occasional callbacks to ongoing storylines. The bi-weekly schedule gives the production team more time per episode than the traditional weekly format, theoretically allowing for higher production values and more refined scripts. Whether this additional time translates into better episodes is subjective and depends on the individual viewer's priorities. What is undeniable is that South Park in 2025 looks and feels different from South Park in 2005 or 1997. The animation is cleaner and more detailed. The stories are more structurally sophisticated. The cultural landscape the show is responding to has changed beyond recognition. Social media, streaming wars, AI, political polarization, pandemic aftershocks, all of these things have created a world that is in many ways stranger and more satirically rich than anything the show faced in its early years. The question that hangs over the franchise is how long it can continue. The $1.5 billion Paramount deal guarantees new episodes through at least the 2029 to 2030 season. If the show makes it that far, it will have been on the air for over 32 years. Only The Simpsons and a handful of other animated programs have lasted longer. Parker and Stone are committed for now, but the signs of strain, the season 27 production apology, the declining episode counts, the shift to bi-weekly schedules suggest that the show is operating in a different mode than it once was. South Park is no longer the hungry, anarchic upstart that shocked the world in 1997. It is an institution. And institutions face different challenges than insurgents do. Now, before we close out the iceberg, we need to talk about something that every South Park fan has an opinion on, but very few can define precisely: the golden era. Ask any group of South Park fans which seasons represent the best stretch of the show, and you will get a remarkably consistent answer: seasons 5 through 11. Sometimes the range is pushed to season 12 or pulled back to start at season 4. But the core of the consensus always centers on this 7-season run from 2001 to 2007. This is the period that produced Scott Tenorman Must Die. This is when Make Love Not Warcraft won its Emmy. This is the era of Trapped in the Closet, Imagination Land, Good Times with Weapons, Woodland Critter Christmas, Awesome O, Casa Bonita, Christian Rock Hard, The Passion of the Jew, Something Walmart, This Way Comes, and dozens of other episodes that are consistently ranked among the greatest in the show's history. So what made this particular stretch so special? Several factors converged. First, Parker and Stone had matured as writers. The growing pains of seasons 1 and 2, where they were still figuring out what the show was and learning to manage the pressures of weekly production, were behind them. By season 5, they had internalized the 6-day production cycle and developed a creative fluency that allowed them to execute ambitious concepts with remarkable consistency. Second, the show had found its satirical voice. Early South Park was primarily shock comedy. The humor came from the novelty of crude language and taboo subjects in an animated format. By season 5, the show had evolved into something much sharper. The vulgarity remained, but it was now in service of genuine satirical commentary. Episodes tackled specific cultural phenomena, political events, religious institutions, and social trends with a precision and intelligence that elevated the show far beyond its crude exterior. Third, this was the period when the show's character dynamics were at their most balanced and productive. All four boys were active participants in storylines. Butters was emerging as a valuable addition to the ensemble. Randy was beginning to develop his expanded personality without yet dominating the show. The supporting cast, including Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Chef, Timmy, Jimmy, Craig, and Tweak, were all in regular rotation and contributing to the show's comedic ecosystem. Fourth, the real world was providing extraordinary material. The post-9/11 cultural landscape, the Iraq War, the rise of social media, the explosion of reality television, the red versus blue political divide, Hurricane Katrina, the Terry Schiavo case, and countless other events gave Parker and Stone an endless supply of targets. The show thrived when there was an abundance of hypocrisy and absurdity to mine, and the mid-2000s were practically overflowing with both. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, Parker and Stone still cared. They were still hungry. They were still angry at the things they were satirizing. The show had not yet become a chore or a routine. Every week felt like an opportunity to say something that mattered, to puncture a balloon that needed puncturing, to tell a joke that nobody else on television would dare to tell. This combination of technical mastery, satirical sharpness, character balance, rich source material, and genuine creative passion produced a 7-season stretch that stands alongside the best work ever done in animated television. Whether you measure it by critical acclaim, audience reception, cultural impact, or simple rewatchability, seasons 5 through 11 represent the peak of South Park. The show has had strong episodes and even strong seasons since then. Season 13 and its focus on popular culture, Season 19's exploration of political correctness, and the ManBearPig redemption arc in Season 22, all demonstrated that South Park could still produce outstanding work. But the sustained excellence of the golden era has never been replicated across a comparable number of consecutive seasons. And there is a poignancy to that because it means the version of South Park that most fans carry in their hearts. The version they think of when someone mentions a show is a version that existed over 15 years ago. The show they are watching today is the same show in name and in many of its fundamental creative elements, but it is operating in a different cultural context with older creators, shorter seasons, and a different relationship to its audience. That is not a criticism. That is simply the nature of any creative enterprise that lasts long enough. Everything changes. The question is whether the changes serve the work or diminish it. And on that question, reasonable people disagree. Now let us circle back and fill in some pieces of the iceberg that we have not yet fully explored. Because there are details scattered across every tier that deserve attention, and a 3-hour deep dive should leave no stone unturned. Let us talk about the show's relationship with awards, because it tells an interesting story about how South Park has been perceived by the entertainment establishment over the years. South Park has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards. Best Friends Forever from Season 9 won in 2005. Make Love, Not Warcraft from Season 10 won in 2007. Imagination Land from Season 11 won in 2008. Margaritaville from Season 13 won in 2009, beating out competitors that included The Simpsons. And It's a Jersey Thing from Season 14 won in 2011. All 5 wins were in the Outstanding Animated Program category. What is notable is the concentration of these wins within the Golden Era and its immediate aftermath. 4 of the 5 wins came from consecutive seasons 9 through 13. The show has not won an Emmy since 2011, despite continuing to air for over a decade since then. Whether this reflects a decline in quality, a shift in the voting body's preferences, increased competition in the animated category, or simply the inevitable cooling of industry enthusiasm for any long-running show is debatable. The show has also been nominated for numerous other awards, including the Annie Award for Best Animated Television Production, which it has won multiple times. The theatrical film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song, as we discussed earlier, and the Peabody Award from 2005 remains one of the most prestigious recognitions ever given to an animated comedy series. Parker and Stone's relationship with award ceremonies has always been complicated. They famously attended the 2000 Academy Awards ceremony dressed as women, wearing the same dresses that Jennifer Lopez and Gwyneth Paltrow had worn to the ceremony the previous year. They have also attended events visibly under the influence of substances, and their general attitude toward industry self-congratulation has been one of cheerful irreverence. This attitude reflects a broader truth about South Park's place in the entertainment landscape. The show has always existed in a space between mainstream respectability and deliberate provocation. It has received the highest honors the industry has to offer while simultaneously producing content that many within that same industry find offensive, tasteless, or harmful. South Park is both an Emmy winner and the holder of a Guinness World Record for profanity. It is a Peabody honoree and a show that depicted Saddam Hussein in a romantic relationship with Satan. These contradictions are not flaws in the show's identity. They are the show's identity. Let us go back to something we touched on earlier but did not fully explore: the evolution of Mr. Garrison and what it reveals about the show's approach to serialized character development over time. Mr. Garrison began the series as the boys' elementary school teacher. He was closeted, angry, and bizarre, carrying a hand puppet named Mr. Hat that he used as a psychological coping mechanism. Over the course of the show's run, Garrison has undergone one of the most extraordinary character transformations in television history. He came out as gay, he transitioned to a woman, becoming Mrs. Garrison, and had a relationship with a man. He then transitioned back to being a man. He ran for president in a storyline that began as a satire of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign but evolved into something more complex as the actual election unfolded. He served as the show's version of the president for multiple seasons. He has been both a minor background character and a central figure in the show's most ambitious political satire. Garrison's evolution is notable because it happened gradually across 28 seasons. It was not planned from the beginning. Parker and Stone did not sit down in 1997 and map out a 25-year character arc that would take Garrison from closeted teacher to transgender woman to President of the United States. Each transformation grew organically out of whatever the show needed at that particular moment in its run. This organic approach to character development is one of South Park's underappreciated strengths. Because episodes are written in 6 days in response to current events, character arcs evolve in real time alongside the culture. Garrison's gender journey reflects evolving public discourse about gender identity. His presidential arc reflects the political climate of 2016 through 2020. His returns to teaching reflect the show's periodic need to refocus on its school-based setting. The result is a character whose personal history reads like a compressed timeline of American cultural change over the past 3 decades. Follow Garrison's story from beginning to end, and you have, in miniature, a record of how the country's conversations about sexuality, gender, politics, and identity have shifted since the late 1990s. Now let us explore another piece of the iceberg that connects the show's past to its present: the Craig and Tweek relationship. Craig Tucker and Tweek Tweek were both minor supporting characters for years. Craig was the perpetually bored kid who flipped people off. Tweek was the jittery, over-caffeinated kid who screamed about pressure. They had no particular connection to each other beyond being classmates. In the season 19 episode Tweek x Craig, the boys of South Park become convinced that Tweek and Craig are in a romantic relationship after the Asian girls in school start drawing yaoi fan art depicting them as a couple. The joke is that the entire town assumes they are dating based on fan art, and Tweek and Craig initially protest that they are not a couple. But then something unexpected happened. By the end of the episode, Tweek and Craig actually do become a couple. And unlike many South Park plot developments, which reset at the end of each episode, this one stuck. Tweek and Craig have remained together as a couple in every subsequent season. They hold hands, they sit together at lunch, they have relationship arguments and make up. Their partnership is treated as entirely normal within the show's universe, no different from any other elementary school relationship. What makes this remarkable is how it happened. The relationship was born from a meta joke about fan-shipping culture and yaoi art. It was not planned as a representation milestone. Parker and Stone found it funny, the audience responded positively, and the relationship became permanent. In a show that has been criticized at various points for its handling of LGBTQ topics, the Tweek and Craig relationship stands as one of the most naturally integrated and consistently positive depictions of a same-sex relationship in mainstream animated television. The relationship has continued for over 6 years now, spanning seasons 19 through 28. It is one of the longest-running storylines in the show that was never originally intended to exist. And it all started because some fictional Asian girls drew fan art. Let us now discuss a topic that has fascinated South Park historians for years: the relationship between the show and its broader cultural impact, specifically the question of whether South Park has actually changed the way Americans think about politics and social issues. This is a controversial claim, but there is evidence to support it. The term South Park Republican was coined in the early 2000s to describe a certain type of young, libertarian-leaning conservative voter who was socially liberal but skeptical of political correctness, government regulation, and what they perceived as liberal sanctimony. These voters identified with South Park's willingness to mock both sides of the political spectrum and his general suspicion of anyone claiming moral authority. The concept was popularized by Andrew Sullivan, who wrote about it in 2001, and it was later expanded by other political commentators who saw South Park as reflecting a new kind of political sensibility, one that was neither traditionally liberal nor traditionally conservative, but was instead defined by a general hostility toward hypocrisy and groupthink regardless of which direction it came from. Parker and Stone have never endorsed any political party or candidate. They have described themselves as libertarians who are skeptical of both Democrats and Republicans, though they have acknowledged being somewhat more critical of liberals because they perceive left-leaning cultural institutions as having more power over everyday life than right-leaning ones. Their stated philosophy is that both sides are equally worthy of ridicule, and the show generally reflects this by alternating its targets across the political spectrum. But the South Park Republican phenomenon suggests that the show may have had a disproportionate influence on young male voters during the 2000s and 2010s. Whether this influence was positive or negative depends entirely on your political perspective. Supporters argue that South Park encouraged independent thinking and healthy skepticism of authority. Critics argue that it promoted a cynical, both-sidesism that discouraged meaningful political engagement and made it easier to dismiss genuine social problems as overblown by elites. Regardless of which side you fall on, the fact that a foul-mouthed animated comedy became a significant enough cultural force to spawn its own political demographic is remarkable. Very few television shows of any genre can claim to have shaped the political consciousness of a generation. Now, as we approach the very bottom of the iceberg, let us talk about the show's broader legacy and what it means for the future of animated television. South Park fundamentally altered the landscape of what was possible in animated comedy. Before South Park, the boundaries of the genre were defined by The Simpsons. The Simpsons proved that animated shows could appeal to adults, that they could incorporate social satire, and that they could address serious topics with intelligence and nuance. But The Simpsons, even at its most daring, operated within certain limits. It was broadcast on network television. It was rated TVPG. It avoided graphic violence, explicit language, and the most extreme forms of social commentary. South Park obliterated those limits. It was the first animated show to air with a TVMA rating. It tackled topics that no other show, animated or live action, would touch. It depicted religious figures, political leaders, and celebrities in ways that were not just unflattering but potentially dangerous, as the Muhammad controversy demonstrated. It used a production model that allowed it to respond to current events faster than any other show in television, giving it a journalistic agility that traditional animation could not replicate. The impact of South Park's existence can be traced through virtually every adult animated show that followed it. Family Guy, American Dad, Archer, Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, Big Mouth, Solar Opposites, and dozens of other animated comedies exist in a landscape that South Park helped create. Not all of these shows emulate South Park's style or approach, but all of them benefit from the creative space that South Park opened up by proving that animated television could be adult, provocative, and commercially successful. The show's influence extends beyond animation. The 6-day production cycle inspired discussions in the broader television industry about whether faster production schedules could be viable for other types of programming. The show's willingness to tackle controversial topics in real-time influenced late-night talk shows, political comedy programs, and online satire. Its merchandising success demonstrated the commercial viability of adult-oriented animated properties, which influenced business decisions at studios and networks for years. And the show's streaming journey, from free episodes on its own website to Hulu to HBO Max to Paramount Plus, serves as a case study in how legacy television properties navigate the transition from linear broadcast to digital distribution. South Park's content has been a bargaining chip in multiple streaming deals, and its library value has been a factor in the corporate strategies of some of the largest media companies in the world. Let us expand on the streaming journey because it is a story that reveals how the business of television has changed around South Park over the last 15 years. In the early days of internet video, South Park was one of the first major television shows to make its episodes available for free online. South Park Studios launched a streaming website where fans could watch every episode in the show's history at no cost, supported by advertising revenue. This was a radical move at the time. Television networks were terrified of putting their content online for free, fearing that it would cannibalize DVD sales and broadcast ratings. Parker and Stone took the opposite view. They believed that making the show freely available would expand its audience and strengthen its cultural relevance. For years, South Park Studios was one of the most popular free streaming destinations on the internet. Fans could watch any episode they wanted anytime without a subscription. The site generated significant advertising revenue and served as a constant source of new viewers who discovered the show through online clips and full episodes. Then the streaming wars began. In 2014, Hulu signed a deal to become the exclusive streaming home of South Park. The free episodes disappeared from South Park Studios, and fans who wanted to stream the show now needed a Hulu subscription. This was an unpopular change among fans who had grown accustomed to free access, but it reflected the broader industry shift toward subscription-based streaming models. In 2019, HBO Max entered the picture with a massive deal reportedly worth $500 million for the exclusive streaming rights to South Park's library. This deal pulled the show off of Hulu and placed it behind HBO Max's paywall. The deal was one of the largest in television licensing history at the time, and demonstrated the enormous library value of a show with over 300 episodes of evergreen content. But the HBO Max deal was short-lived relative to the show's history. When Warner Media merged with Discovery to form Warner Bros. Discovery, the new corporate entity began reshuffling its streaming strategy. South Park's streaming rights eventually migrated to Paramount Plus as part of the broader $1.5 billion deal that also guaranteed new episodes and streaming specials through the end of the decade. This journey from free streaming on the show's own website to Hulu to HBO Max to Paramount Plus mirrors the broader chaos of the streaming wars that the show itself satirized in its Streaming Wars specials. The irony of South Park being tossed between competing streaming platforms while simultaneously mocking those platforms in its own content was not lost on fans. In the Streaming Wars specials, the show depicted the streaming landscape as a literal water war. with various factions fighting over a resource that everyone wanted but nobody could agree on how to distribute. The streaming journey also had practical consequences for the show's availability. During the transitions between platforms, there were periods when certain episodes or entire seasons were temporarily unavailable on any legal streaming service. The 5 banned Muhammad episodes remained completely unavailable regardless of which platform held the rights, and international availability varied wildly, with some countries having access to the full library and others having only partial catalogs or no legal streaming option at all. For a show that was once freely available to anyone with an internet connection, the fragmentation of its streaming presence represents a significant change in how audiences access and experience South Park. New fans discovering the show today face a very different landscape than fans who discovered it in the free streaming era. Now, one more entry that deserves attention before our final thoughts: the connection between South Park and Parker and Stone's other major creative works, because the DNA of South Park runs through everything they have ever made. Team America, World Police, released in 2004, was a satirical action film made entirely with marionettes in the style of Jerry Anderson's Thunderbirds. The film was produced during South Park's run, and its production created one of the most stressful periods in Parker and Stone's careers. They were simultaneously producing weekly episodes of South Park and trying to complete a feature film with an entirely different animation technology. The result was a period of extreme creative and physical exhaustion that nearly broke both of them. Team America shares South Park's satirical DNA completely. It mocks American foreign policy, Hollywood celebrity activism, the war on terror, and the action film genre itself, all through the deliberately absurd medium of marionette puppetry. The film's most infamous scene involves a graphic puppet sex sequence that was originally so explicit that the MPAA gave the film an NC-17 rating. Parker and Stone had to trim the scene 9 separate times before the MPAA would grant it an R rating. They have joked that the puppet sex scene required more revision passes than any other scene they have ever produced. The puppet aesthetic of Team America serves the same function as the construction paper aesthetic of South Park. It is deliberately crude, it is intentionally limited, and that limitation becomes the joke. Watching marionettes attempt to perform action sequences, romantic scenes, and emotional monologues is inherently funny because the medium cannot support the ambition. The puppets wobble, their strings are visible, their movements are jerky and unnatural. This gap between what the film is trying to be and what it physically can be is the source of much of its humor. The Book of Mormon, which debuted on Broadway in 2011, represents the fullest realization of Parker and Stone's creative philosophy outside of South Park. The musical won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, and has grossed over $600 million in ticket sales worldwide. It is one of the most successful Broadway musicals of the 21st century. Like South Park, the Book of Mormon uses irreverence and vulgarity as a delivery mechanism for more substantive observations about faith, community, and the human need for meaning. The musical's most famous songs, including Hasa Diga Ibawai, I Believe, and Turn It Off, employ the same technique that South Park uses in its best episodes. They make you laugh first and think second. The humor opens the door and the substance walks through it. What connects all of Parker and Stone's work, from the Spirit of Christmas shorts to the latest South Park specials, is a consistent creative philosophy. Start with something that looks simple, make it funny. Then, when the audience is not expecting it, reveal the complexity hiding underneath. South Park looks like a crude cartoon about foul-mouthed kids. Team America looks like a puppet show. The Book of Mormon looks like a blasphemous comedy. But all of them, beneath their surfaces, are doing something far more sophisticated than their packaging suggests. That philosophy is why South Park has lasted nearly 3 decades. It is why the show has survived every controversy, every corporate transition, every creative stumble, and every prediction of its demise. The surface is always changing, but the core remains the same. Start simple, be funny, then go deeper than anyone expects. And there is something genuinely remarkable about the fact that two people have maintained creative control of a single television property for this long without ever being fired, replaced, or pushed aside by corporate interests. In an industry where showrunners are routinely replaced, where creative visions are compromised by network interference, and where the original creators of a hit show can find themselves marginalized within a few seasons, Parker and Stone have maintained absolute dominion over South Park for its entire existence. No other writer has ever been credited as the primary author of a South Park episode. No external director has ever helmed an episode. No corporate executive has ever successfully overridden a creative decision, with the notable exception of the 201 censorship, which Parker and Stone have never forgiven. This creative continuity is the single most important factor in the show's longevity. South Park has a consistent voice because it has always been the voice of the same two people. It has a consistent worldview because Parker and Stone's worldview, while evolving over time, has never been diluted by committee decision-making or corporate mandate. When the show takes a position on a topic, it is genuinely their position, not the sanitized output of a writer's room trying to offend no one and appeal to everyone. This is also what makes South Park feel different from virtually every other long-running television show. The Simpsons has been through multiple showrunners. Family Guy has evolved through different creative eras with varying degrees of involvement from Seth MacFarlane. Saturday Night Live reinvents itself every few years with new cast members and head writers. South Park is still the same two guys from Boulder, Colorado, sitting in the same building, trying to finish a script by Wednesday night. The scale has changed, the budget has changed, the platform has changed, but the creative process has not. Whether that process can sustain another 5 years, another 10 years, or another 20 years is the question that hangs over the show as it enters its fourth decade. The $1.5 billion deal guarantees content through 2029 or 2030. But deals are not inspiration. Money does not write scripts. And even the most dedicated creators eventually reach a point where the well runs dry. But if the last 28 years have taught us anything, it is that predicting the end of South Park is a fool's errand. People have been predicting the show's demise since season 2, and it has outlasted every single one of those predictions. The show adapts, it evolves, it stumbles and recovers. It makes mistakes and corrects them sometimes a decade later. It takes on the most powerful institutions on the planet and somehow comes out the other side still standing, still irreverent, and still funny. But the question that hangs over all of this is simple. How much longer can it last? Parker and Stone are no longer the hungry, broke college graduates who made a cartoon out of construction paper in 1992. They are wealthy, accomplished, and by their own admission, occasionally tired. The 6-day production cycle that gives South Park its edge is also physically and creatively grueling. Parker has spoken in interviews about the toll the schedule takes, about weeks where he barely sleeps, about the anxiety of staring at a blank page on Thursday morning and knowing that a finished episode must exist by the following Wednesday. That kind of pressure is sustainable in your 20s and 30s. It becomes harder in your 50s. The $1.5 billion deal signed in July 2025 guarantees that South Park will produce at least 50 more episodes extending through 2029 or 2030. That is a massive commitment, both financially and creatively. The deal ensures that the show will run for at least 33 seasons, making it one of the longest-running scripted programs in American television history. But a deal guaranteeing episodes is not the same as a deal guaranteeing quality. The question is not whether South Park will continue. The question is whether it can continue to matter the way it has for the last 28 years. The streaming specials offer a possible answer. Starting in 2021, Parker and Stone began producing long-form specials for Paramount Plus, each running approximately 60 to 90 minutes. These specials allowed the creators to tell more expansive stories without the constraints of a 22-minute format. South Park Q Vaccination Special, Post-COVID, The Return of COVID, The Streaming Wars, and The Streaming Wars Part 2 all explored topics that benefited from the extended runtime. The specials were generally well received, with Post-COVID earning particular praise for its depiction of the boys as adults, in a future shaped by decades of pandemic aftermath. The specials also represent a hedge against creative burnout. Instead of producing 22-minute episodes on a weekly 6-day cycle for 14 weeks straight, Parker and Stone can spread their creative energy across a mix of standard episodes and longer specials, each with slightly more production time. It is a more sustainable model for creators who have been doing this for nearly 3 decades. But there is a counter-argument. The specials, while entertaining, lack the spontaneity that defines South Park at its best. The 6-day cycle forces the show to be reactive, topical, and immediate. A special that takes months to produce cannot comment on last week's news. It trades agility for ambition, and whether that trade is worth making depends on what you value most about South Park. The show's most recent standard episodes continue to demonstrate that the 6-day model still works. Season 28 has tackled contemporary topics with the same speed and irreverence that defined the show in its prime. But the episode counts have been declining. Season 25 had only 6 episodes. Season 26 had 6 episodes. Seasons 27 and 28 have produced roughly 5 to 6 episodes each, with some moving to a bi-weekly airing schedule rather than the traditional weekly cadence. The total output per year has decreased significantly from the 14 episode seasons that were standard during the show's peak era. Whether this is a sign of creative decline, a strategic response to the streaming landscape, or simply a natural consequence of two 50-something creators managing a massive franchise while also developing other projects is open to interpretation. Parker and Stone have been involved in developing a series of South Park films, managing the show's streaming presence across platforms, and overseeing the video game franchise. Their attention is divided in ways it was not during the early seasons, when South Park was the only thing they were working on. Now let us return to some of the deepest iceberg entries that we have not yet fully explored, because there are stories hiding in the margins of South Park's history that deserve to be told. Let us talk about the show's relationship with awards, because it is genuinely bizarre. South Park has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards. The first came in 2005 for the episode Best Friends Forever, which won Outstanding Animated Program. The show would go on to win the same category 4 more times for Make Love, Not Warcraft in 2007, Imagination Land in 2008, and additional wins in subsequent years. But here's the paradox. In 2006, South Park also won a Peabody Award. The Peabody Award is one of the most prestigious honors in electronic media. Previous recipients include Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow, and programs like Sesame Street and 60 Minutes. The Peabody Committee specifically praised South Park's ability to use postmodern irony to tackle complex social and political issues. The citation noted that the show had become an unexpected voice of reason in American cultural discourse. At the time it received the Peabody, South Park also held the Guinness World Record for the most profanity in an animated television series. It had been the subject of multiple FCC complaints. It had depicted Jesus Christ, the Pope, the Prophet Muhammad, and the Virgin Mary in ways that had generated international controversy. It featured characters whose names were crude sexual jokes, and it was being honored alongside the most respected programming in American media. Parker and Stone attended the Peabody ceremony. They reportedly showed up wearing dresses, not as a protest or a statement, but because they thought it was funny. The juxtaposition of 2 men in evening gowns accepting an award previously given to Walter Cronkite is, in its own way, perfectly on brand for South Park. The Peabody win was a turning point in how the show was perceived by the broader media establishment. Before the Peabody, South Park was often dismissed by cultural critics as vulgar shock comedy with no redeeming value. After the Peabody, it became impossible to make that argument with a straight face. The show had been formally recognized by one of the most respected institutions in American media as having genuine cultural significance. Love it or hate it, South Park was now part of the canon. Let us go even deeper. Let us talk about the voice actors who never got the credit they deserved. We already discussed Mary Kay Bergman and the chain of pseudonyms that followed her. But there are other voice contributors whose work has been largely invisible to the public. Adrien Beard has voiced Tolkien Black, formerly known as Tolken, since season 4. As we mentioned earlier, he got the job because he was the only Black employee at South Park Studios when the character needed a voice. But what most fans do not realize is that Beard's primary job is not voice acting. He is a production supervisor and storyboard artist. Voice work is something he does in addition to his actual job. He has been performing the role for over 2 decades without ever receiving the kind of public recognition that the show's more prominent voice actors enjoy. Mona Marshall has voiced multiple female characters since approximately season 4. Most notably Sheila Broflovsky and Linda Stotch. She took over several roles after Mary Kay Bergman's death and has been a consistent presence in the show's cast ever since. Like Beard, she is a working professional whose contribution to South Park is enormous but largely uncelebrated by the general public. April Stewart, who was initially credited under the pseudonym Gracie Lazar, voiced the majority of the show's female characters from approximately 2004 through her departure. Stewart's range was extraordinary, covering characters as diverse as Wendy Testaberger, Mayor McDaniels, and Principal Victoria across hundreds of episodes. The show's voice cast has always been remarkably small for its scope. Parker voices the vast majority of the male characters, including Stan, Cartman, Randy, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Jimmy, Timmy, and dozens of others. Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters, and several supporting characters. The remainder of the cast, both male and female roles, has been covered by a rotating handful of performers who work long hours during the show's compressed production schedule. This lean voice cast is another consequence of the 6-day production model. When you only have 6 days to produce an episode, you cannot afford to schedule separate recording sessions for 20 different voice actors. Having most of the voices performed by 2 people who are already in the building writing and directing the episode eliminates an enormous amount of scheduling complexity. Now let us discuss something that has never been fully cataloged but that represents one of the most fascinating aspects of South Park's creative history: the show's relationship with its own mistakes. South Park has a unique willingness among long-running television shows to acknowledge and even correct its own errors. The most dramatic example is the ManBearPig storyline. In the season 10 episode ManBearPig, which aired in 2006, Al Gore is depicted as a delusional narcissist who desperately tries to convince people that a half-man, half-bear, half-pig creature is real and threatening civilization. The boys humor him for a while before eventually dismissing his claims as the ravings of a lonely, attention-seeking former vice president. The episode was a clear satire of climate change advocacy, and it depicted Gore as someone who manufactured a crisis for personal validation. 12 years later, in season 22, South Park revisited ManBearPig, and this time the creature was real. ManBearPig arrived in South Park and began killing people. The adults, who had previously dismissed its existence, were forced to confront the fact that they had been wrong. Al Gore returned, and while the show still mocked his personality and his need for personal validation, it also vindicated his core message. ManBearPig was real, the threat was real, and the people who had dismissed it had done so at their own peril. The season 22. ManBearPig episodes were widely interpreted as an apology from Parker and Stone for their earlier dismissal of climate change. The show did not spell this out explicitly because South Park never spells anything out explicitly, but the subtext was unmistakable. The creators had changed their minds, and they used the show's own continuity to acknowledge that change. During the ManBearPig's rampage in Season 22, Satan himself was killed. The actual devil, who had been a recurring character since the show's first season, was permanently eliminated. Satan's death at the hands of ManBearPig was both a dramatic escalation of the creature's threat level and a symbolic statement about the seriousness of the issue ManBearPig represented. If climate change in the show's metaphorical framework could kill the devil himself, then it was a threat beyond anything the show had previously depicted. This willingness to revisit and revise is rare in television. Most shows either ignore their earlier mistakes or pretend they never happened. South Park went back, confronted its own bad take, and wove the correction into an existing storyline in a way that was both narratively satisfying and thematically honest. The show has done this on a smaller scale as well. The Tolkien Black retcon in Season 25 was another example of the show using its own continuity to make a point about assumptions and prejudice. The retcon only worked because the show had previously committed to the name Tolkien so thoroughly that the audience accepted it without question, making the reveal that it had been Tolkien all along feel like both a correction and an indictment. Now, let us discuss one of the most overlooked aspects of South Park's production history, the role of Bill Hader. Bill Hader, the Saturday Night Live alum and star of Barry, served as a consulting producer and writer on South Park for 16 episodes between 2008 and 2009. This is not widely known among casual fans, partly because Hader's involvement was primarily behind the scenes and partly because the show's public identity is so thoroughly associated with Parker and Stone that other creative contributors tend to be overlooked. Hader has spoken about his time on the show in various interviews and podcasts. He has described the experience as both exhilarating and exhausting, consistent with what we know about the 6-day production cycle. His contributions to specific episodes have not been publicly itemized in detail, but his presence during seasons 12 and 13 coincides with a period that many fans consider a creative peak for the show. What makes Hader's involvement particularly interesting is what it reveals about South Park's creative process. Despite its reputation as a two-man show, South Park has always relied on a small team of writers and consultants who contribute ideas during the Thursday brainstorming sessions. Vernon Chapman, a writer and comedian known for his work on Wonder Chosen, has been a consulting producer on the show since season 10. Kyle McCulloch has been credited as a writer and consultant for multiple seasons. The creative process is collaborative, even if the final product is ultimately shaped by Parker's singular voice as the primary writer, director, and voice performer. Hader's stint on the show also highlights the intensity of the South Park work environment. Writers who join the show for a season or two often describe it as one of the most demanding experiences of their careers. The combination of the compressed timeline, the pressure to be topical, and the exacting standards of a show that has been operating at peak cultural relevance for decades creates an atmosphere that is simultaneously creative and punishing. Let us continue with another deep Iceberg entry: the early budget disparity between South Park and its competitors. When South Park premiered in 1997, each episode reportedly cost approximately $250,000 to $300,000 to produce. Compare this to The Simpsons, which at the time cost approximately $1.5 million per episode. South Park's budget was a fraction of its main competitors, and the show's crude animation style was partly a consequence of these financial constraints. But the low budget also became the show's creative advantage. Because South Park cost so little to produce, Comedy Central was willing to give Parker and Stone more creative freedom than a higher budget show would receive. The network could afford to let the show take risks because the financial exposure on any individual episode was relatively small. If an episode bombed or generated controversy, the loss was manageable in a way that it would not have been for a show costing 5 or 10 times as much. This dynamic persists to some degree even today. South Park's production costs have increased over the years, but the show remains significantly cheaper to produce than most animated programs of comparable cultural impact. The combination of a small voice cast, a streamlined animation pipeline, and a compressed production schedule keeps costs down while maximizing output. The low budget also influenced the show's aesthetic in ways that have proven remarkably durable. Because South Park could not afford elaborate animation, it developed a visual language built on simplicity, speed, and clever staging. Characters are flat, movements are limited, backgrounds are sparse. But the simplicity of the visuals focuses attention on the writing, which has always been the show's primary strength. You do not watch South Park for the animation. You watch it for what the characters say and do. The crude visuals are not a weakness, they are a delivery mechanism for the writing. This principle has influenced how Parker and Stone think about storytelling across all their projects. The Book of Mormon, their massively successful Broadway musical, uses relatively simple staging compared to many big-budget productions. Basketball, their 1998 film, was deliberately low-key in its visual approach. Parker's filmography, including Cannibal, the musical Orgasmo, and Team America, World Police, consistently prioritizes writing and performance over visual spectacle. The lesson they learned from those early South Park budgets, that good writing does not need expensive packaging, has informed their entire creative philosophy. Now let us discuss what happened with the most recent seasons, because the period from season 25 through season 28 represents a fundamental shift in how South Park is produced and distributed. Starting with season 25, which premiered in February 2022, the show moved to a compressed format. Instead of the traditional 14-episode seasons that were standard during the show's peak period, season 25 consisted of only 6 episodes. Season 26, which aired in early 2023, also had 6 episodes. Season 27, which aired in late 2023, dropped to 5 episodes. And Season 28, which premiered in the fall of 2025, has continued with a similar compressed output. This reduction in episode count is a direct consequence of the $1.5 billion deal and the show's expanded commitment to producing streaming specials for Paramount+. Parker and Stone are now dividing their creative energy between standard television episodes and long-form specials, which means fewer standard episodes per season, but more total content when the specials are included. The move to bi-weekly airing schedules for some of these compressed seasons has also changed the show's relationship with its audience. During the weekly airing era, South Park had a rhythm. Every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, a new episode arrived. Fans built their viewing habits around that schedule. The bi-weekly model breaks that rhythm, creating gaps that can cause the viewers to lose momentum or forget to tune in. Viewership numbers reflect this shift. The most recent episodes of Season 28 have drawn approximately 460,000 to 540,000 live viewers, according to Nielsen data. These numbers are a fraction of what the show pulled during its peak, when episodes regularly drew 3 to 4 million live viewers. But live viewership numbers are increasingly misleading in the streaming era. The show's total viewership across Paramount+, DVR, and on-demand platforms is significantly higher than the live numbers suggest. The compression of seasons has also affected the show's storytelling approach. With only 5 or 6 episodes per season instead of 14, there is less room for experimentation, less room for throwaway episodes, and more pressure on each individual episode to be significant. The show can no longer afford to have a slow week or a filler episode when the entire season consists of 5 installments. Whether this compression represents an improvement or a decline depends on your perspective. Some fans argue that the shorter seasons have resulted in a more consistent quality level, with fewer weak episodes diluting the season. Others argue that the reduced output means fewer opportunities for the kind of unexpected creative swings that produced some of the show's greatest episodes in the past. A 14-episode season can afford to experiment because it has a safety net. A 5-episode season cannot. There is one more production detail from recent years that deserves attention, and it is something that had never happened before in the show's history. During the production of Season 27, South Park missed a deadline. The episode could not be completed in time for its scheduled air date, and Parker issued a public apology. This was unprecedented. For 26 seasons, the 6-day cycle had held. Episodes had arrived at the last possible moment, sometimes hours before broadcast, but they had always arrived. The Season 27 miss was the first time the cycle failed. Parker's apology was characteristically straightforward. He acknowledged the miss, took responsibility, and did not make excuses. But the incident raised questions about the sustainability of the 6-day model as Parker and Stone age and their professional commitments multiply. A production schedule with zero margin for error becomes exponentially riskier as the people responsible for maintaining it enter the later stages of their careers. The show's future, then, is a balance of competing forces. There is the contractual commitment to 50 more episodes through the end of the decade. There is the creative energy of 2 men who have been doing this longer than most television careers last. There is the production model that gives the show its edge, but also makes it vulnerable to the kind of failures that occurred in Season 27. There is the streaming landscape that has reshaped the economics of the show, but also fragmented its audience. And there is the simple question of whether South Park can continue to surprise a world that has been watching it for nearly 3 decades. The history of the show suggests that the answer is yes, but with caveats. South Park has survived creative ruts before. Season 20, with its serialized storyline tracking the 2016 presidential election, is widely considered the weakest season in the show's history. It holds a 54% score on Rotten Tomatoes, the lowest of any season. Parker has acknowledged that the season's over-reliance on serialization was a mistake, and the show course-corrected in subsequent seasons by returning to a more episodic format. The show also survived the loss of its most important female voice actress, the departure of one of its most beloved cast members, death threats from extremists, bans by multiple foreign governments, corporate censorship by its own network, and a global pandemic that shut down its production for months. Each time it adapted and continued. That resilience is built into the show's DNA. The 6-day cycle was born from necessity, from the constraint of having almost no time and almost no money. South Park has always been a show that thrives under pressure and finds creative solutions to impossible problems. The question is not whether South Park will end. Everything ends. The question is what it will mean when it does. Before we wrap up, there are several more entries on the iceberg that we have not fully explored, and a 3-hour deep dive would not be complete without them. So let us keep going. First, let us talk about India's ban on South Park, because it is a completely separate story from the China ban and one that lasted much longer. In 2010, India's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting banned South Park from airing on Indian television. The ban was not triggered by a single episode, but by a general determination that the show's content violated Indian broadcasting standards regarding obscenity, vulgarity, and the depiction of religious figures. India has strict guidelines about what can be shown on television, particularly when it comes to content that might offend religious sensibilities. And South Park's casual treatment of Hindu deities, among many other things, put it in violation of those standards. The ban lasted approximately 9 years, from 2010 to 2019. During that entire period, South Park was completely unavailable through official channels in one of the world's largest media markets. Indian fans who wanted to watch the show had to rely on unofficial means, which created a dedicated underground following that consumed the show through file sharing, VPN services, and imported DVDs. When the ban was eventually lifted around 2019, it received relatively little attention in the Western media. The China ban, which occurred in the same year, completely overshadowed it. But the India ban was actually more consequential in terms of duration and market size. India has a population of over 1.4 billion people, compared to China's 1.4 billion. South Park was blocked from both of the world's two most populous countries at the same time, which means the show was officially unavailable to roughly a third of the planet's population during the period when both bans were simultaneously in effect. Parker and Stone have never commented on the India ban with the same directness that they addressed the China ban. There was no sarcastic apology. There was no follow-up episode mocking the Indian government. The India ban simply existed as a quiet background fact of the show's international distribution, known to fans who followed South Park's global availability, but mostly unknown to the general audience. Now let us discuss something that connects to our earlier conversation about Season 20, but deserves its own expanded treatment. The question of serialization and why it nearly broke the show. For its first 17 seasons, South Park was almost entirely episodic. Each episode told a self-contained story that began and ended within 22 minutes. There were occasional two-part episodes and rare callbacks to previous storylines, but the default mode was standalone. You could watch any episode in any order and understand it completely. Starting with Season 18 in 2014, Parker and Stone began experimenting with light serialization. Episodes in Season 18 had connecting threads. Characters referenced events from previous episodes, plot points carried over from week to week. The approach was subtle at first, more like an ongoing background texture than a traditional serialized narrative. Fans generally responded positively. The connecting tissue gave the season a sense of momentum without sacrificing the individual episode quality. Season 19 pushed the serialization further, with a season-long arc involving political correctness, gentrification, and the introduction of a new character called PC Principal. The arc worked reasonably well because it was thematically coherent and because the individual episodes within it could still function on their own. Then came Season 20 and everything fell apart. Season 20 attempted to tell a single continuous story across the entire season. The plot involved internet trolls, the member berries, which were small sentient berries that symbolized nostalgia and resistance to change, and a satirical version of the 2016 presidential election. Parker and Stone wrote the season with the assumption that the election would produce a specific outcome. When the actual result was different from what they anticipated, the entire narrative structure of the season was compromised. The problem with fully serialized South Park was not just the election curveball. It was that serialization fundamentally conflicts with the show's greatest strength, its 6-day production cycle. The 6-day cycle allows South Park to be reactive and topical. Each episode can respond to whatever happened in the news that week. But serialization requires planning. It requires knowing where the story is going weeks or months in advance. These two approaches are in direct tension with each other. When you write a serialized season in 6-day bursts, you end up making promises in early episodes that you may not be able to keep in later episodes because the real world has changed underneath you. Season 20 made narrative promises based on assumptions about the election that turned out to be wrong, and the show could not pivot fast enough to salvage the story. The result was a season that felt disjointed, unsatisfying, and uncharacteristically clumsy. The Rotten Tomatoes score for Season 20 was 54%, the lowest in the show's history at that time. Fan reception was similarly negative. The season is frequently cited in discussions of South Park's worst creative periods, and its failure had a lasting impact on how Parker and Stone approached subsequent seasons. After Season 20, the show pulled back significantly from serialization. Seasons 21 and 22 returned to a more episodic format, with occasional connecting threads but no overarching narrative. The course correction was both deliberate and publicly acknowledged. Parker essentially admitted that the experiment had gone too far and that the show worked best when individual episodes were allowed to stand on their own. The legacy of Season 20 is a cautionary tale about the limits of creative ambition in a constrained production environment. South Park's 6-day cycle is a marvel of efficiency and agility, but it is not designed for long-form storytelling. It is designed for rapid response satire, for capturing the zeitgeist of a single week, and turning it into 22 minutes of comedy. Asking it to also serve as the engine for a 10-episode serialized narrative was asking it to do something it was never built to do. Now, one more deep entry that we should cover before moving toward our close. The relationship between South Park and its fandom, specifically the phenomenon of fan-created content and how the show has responded to it. South Park has one of the most active and creative fan bases in animation. Fan art, fan fiction, fan-made animations, wiki pages, discussion forums, YouTube analysis videos, TikTok compilations, and Discord communities have thrived around the show for decades. The South Park wiki alone contains thousands of detailed entries covering every character, episode, location, and piece of lore in the show's history, maintained by volunteer editors who track the show's mythology with a precision that would impress academic researchers. The show has engaged with its fandom in ways that range from affectionate to satirical. The Tweek and Craig relationship, as we discussed, was born from the show's awareness of its own fan-shipping culture. The yaoi fan art that Japanese fans created depicting Tweek and Craig as romantic partners became the literal plot of the episode Tweek x Craig. And the relationship that emerged from that episode has been permanent canon ever since. It is one of the rare cases in television where fan-created content directly influenced the show's actual storyline, but the show has also mocked its own fans. Episodes about internet commenting culture, online mob mentality, and the tendency of fans to overanalyze and overinvest in fictional properties have been recurring themes throughout South Park's later seasons. The show is aware that its audience includes people who pick apart every frame looking for hidden meanings, and it is both flattered and amused by this attention. The fan wiki and various fan databases have also served as unofficial quality control for the show. When South Park makes a continuity error or contradicts its own established lore, the fan community catches it almost immediately. This creates a kind of accountability loop where the show's writers know that any mistake will be documented and debated within hours of airing. Whether this makes the writers more careful or simply more anxious is an open question. One interesting side effect of the show's active fandom is the preservation of material that might otherwise have been lost. The 5 banned Muhammad episodes, which have been pulled from all official platforms, continue to exist in fan-maintained archives. Deleted scenes, alternate cuts, and early draft scripts have been preserved by fans who obtained them through various means. The leaked Game Boy Color game that we discussed earlier in the Iceberg was preserved and distributed by fans after it surfaced online in 2014. In many ways, the fan community serves as an unofficial archive for South Park's complete history, including the parts that the show's corporate owners would prefer to forget. One of the most interesting and underappreciated aspects of South Park's history is its relationship with religion. Not just the controversies we have already discussed, like the Scientology episode or the Muhammad ban, but the show's broader, more nuanced engagement with faith, belief, and spirituality across its entire run. Jesus Christ lives in South Park, not metaphorically, not as a symbol. Jesus is a literal resident of the town who has his own cable access television show called Jesus and Pals. He has appeared in dozens of episodes across the show's run, starting from the very first Spirit of Christmas shorts. He fights, he gives advice, he gets frustrated with the townspeople, and he occasionally performs miracles. In the show's universe, Jesus is simultaneously the Son of God and a relatively ordinary guy who lives in a small Colorado town and sometimes struggles with the same mundane problems as everyone else. Satan, as we discussed, was also a recurring character until his death in season 22. But what is remarkable about South Park's depiction of Satan is how sympathetic it is. In the theatrical film, Satan is depicted as an emotionally vulnerable figure trapped in an abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein. He wants to go to the surface world. He wants to be appreciated. He sings a power ballad called Up There about his desire to see the world above hell. It is genuinely moving. and it is sung by the actual devil in a movie that holds the world record for animated swearing. The show has also depicted God directly as a small, strange-looking creature that is neither fully human nor fully animal. It has depicted Buddha snorting cocaine. It has depicted Moses as a giant floating dreidel that communicates through a computer-like interface. It has depicted Joseph Smith's origin story in meticulous detail, with a running on-screen text reading "Dum dum 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 dum" throughout the explanation of the golden plates and the seer stones. It has explored Mormonism, Catholicism, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism with varying degrees of irreverence and, surprisingly, occasional genuine respect. The Mormon episode All About Mormons from Season 7 is a particularly interesting case. The episode meticulously explains the founding of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, complete with the mocking "dum dum dum" refrain. It seems like a straightforward takedown of Mormon beliefs, but at the end of the episode, a Mormon kid named Gary delivers a monologue that essentially says, "Yes, the founding story sounds absurd, but my family is happy, my community is strong, and my faith gives my life meaning. So what does it matter if the origin story seems unlikely?" The episode ends with Gary walking away, leaving Stan and the audience to sit with the uncomfortable realization that mocking someone's beliefs is not the same as disproving their value. This kind of nuance is what separates South Park from simple shock comedy. The show is perfectly willing to be offensive, crude, and deliberately provocative, but it is also capable of unexpected depth, of pulling the rug out from under its own jokes to reveal a more complicated truth underneath. Parker and Stone used the same approach years later when they created The Book of Mormon, their Broadway musical about two young Mormon missionaries sent to Uganda. The musical is hilariously irreverent about Mormon theology, but it is also fundamentally respectful of the impulse behind faith and the genuine good that religious communities can do. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reportedly took out advertisements in the playbill of the show's original Broadway run, demonstrating a remarkably good-humored response to being the target of an entire musical's worth of satire. Now let us talk about something that connects to the animation discussion we had earlier but goes deeper. The specific technical infrastructure that makes South Park's 6-day cycle possible. South Park Studios, located in Culver City, California, is not a traditional animation studio. It is more accurately described as a content factory, a facility designed from the ground up to produce animated content at a speed that would be impossible in a conventional animation pipeline. The studio employs approximately 70 people during production periods. These include animators, editors, sound engineers, production assistants, and the writing staff. During a typical production week, the team works extraordinarily long hours. 100-hour weeks are not uncommon. The building operates around the clock from Thursday through Wednesday, with different teams handling different stages of production in overlapping shifts. The animation pipeline is built on Autodesk Maya, with Apple Motion handling visual effects. Character models, backgrounds, and props are stored in a massive digital library that has been built up over the show's entire run. When an animator needs a background of South Park's main street, they do not create it from scratch. They pull it from the library. When they need a character to wear a specific outfit, they check if that outfit already exists in the system. This library approach dramatically reduces the amount of new art that needs to be created for each episode, which is essential when you only have 6 days. Voice recording happens on site, often in Parker's office or a nearby sound booth. Because Parker and Stone voice the majority of the characters themselves, recording sessions can happen at any time during the production week without needing to coordinate with external talent. When additional voice actors are needed, they are typically local performers who can come to the studio on short notice. Sound design and music are handled in-house as well. The show's composer, Scott Nicoli, along with the sound team, works on the musical score and sound effects during the final days of production, often finishing mere hours before the episode is transmitted to Comedy Central. The transmission itself is done via satellite uplink directly from South Park Studios to Comedy Central's broadcast facility. In the show's early years, this was a literal last-minute operation, with the finalized episode being uploaded just hours before airtime. The tightness of this window has been the source of both legendary production stories and genuine anxiety. The 2013 power outage that delayed the season 17 premiere was catastrophic precisely because there was no buffer. When the power went out, the entire production stopped, and there was no way to make up the lost time. The studio's physical layout has been designed to minimize the distance between different stages of production. Writing, animation, editing, and sound are all housed in the same building, often on the same floor. This means that when Parker finishes a script revision at 2 a.m, the animators down the hall can start working on the new pages immediately. There is no transit time, no file transfer delays, no waiting for external vendors. Everything happens under one roof. This integrated production model is essentially unique in television animation. Other shows distribute their production across multiple studios, often in different countries. The Simpsons, for example, has its animation produced in South Korea by the studio Rough Draft. Family Guy uses similar outsourcing arrangements. South Park keeps everything in-house in Culver City, which gives it total control over the production process, but also means that every aspect of the show is vulnerable to any disruption at the studio. Let us now go back and fill in one more tier entry that deserves extended attention: the Toddy Walters situation. Toddy Walters is a name that most South Park fans have never heard. She was a voice actress who contributed to the show during its earliest seasons, approximately seasons 1 through 3. Walters voiced several minor characters and contributed to the show's initial roster of female voices alongside Mary Kay Bergman. What makes Walters' story significant is not her contributions, but her departure. There are indications of a behind-the-scenes falling out between Walters and the production team, though the specific details have never been publicly confirmed in full. Her departure from the show coincided with the broader reshuffling of the voice cast that occurred after Bergman's death in 1999, and her name largely disappeared from public discussions of the show's history. The Walters situation is one of several examples of behind-the-scenes conflicts that have been largely erased from the public narrative of South Park. The show's official history tends to focus on Parker and Stone's creative vision, the technical innovation of the 6-day cycle, and the cultural controversies generated by the content. The human stories behind the production, the conflicts, departures, and professional disagreements that occur in any long-running television production are mostly hidden from view. This is not unusual for television. Most shows have similar stories buried in their production histories. But South Park's carefully cultivated image as a two-man operation helmed by iconoclastic creative geniuses makes these hidden stories particularly interesting. The show is presented as the product of Parker and Stone's singular vision, and to a large degree it is. But like any complex creative endeavor that has spanned nearly 3 decades and employed hundreds of people, the full story is more complicated than the public narrative suggests. Now let us discuss one more fascinating piece of South Park lore that ties several Iceberg entries together: the show's handling of continuity and the question of whether South Park exists in a single coherent timeline or multiple overlapping ones. For most of its run, South Park operated on a strict episodic reset model. Whatever happened in one episode was largely forgotten by the next. Characters could die and return, buildings could be destroyed and rebuilt. Catastrophic events could occur with no lasting consequences. This reset model was a deliberate choice by Parker and Stone, who preferred the creative freedom of a blank slate over the constraints of ongoing continuity. But as the show progressed, continuity began to creep in. Kenny's permanent death at the end of season 5 lasted an entire season. Butter's promotion from background extra to main character was permanent. Chef's death in season 10 was never reversed. The reveal about Cartman's father in 201 retroactively changed the meaning of Scott Tenorman Must Die across a gap of nearly a decade. And starting with season 18, the show began experimenting with season-long serialized storylines that built from episode to episode. This gradual introduction of continuity created a strange hybrid timeline. Some events are permanent and referenced across seasons. Others are completely forgotten. Kenny has been established as canonically immortal, but the show still occasionally kills him without any acknowledgement of the Cthulhu mythology. Characters age in the streaming specials, with post-COVID depicting the boys as adults, but in the regular series they remain perpetual fourth graders. The Tolkien retcon retroactively changed 25 years of closed captioning, but other retcons have been less thorough. The result is a timeline that is simultaneously continuous and fragmented. Certain plot threads, like Cartman's relationship with Scott Tenorman, or Kenny's immortality, or Tweak, and Craig's romance, exist in a coherent narrative that spans multiple seasons. Other plot threads exist in isolation, self-contained stories that have no connection to anything that came before or after. The show moves fluidly between these two modes, sometimes within a single season. This approach to continuity reflects a broader philosophy that Parker and Stone have articulated in various interviews. They believe that the needs of the individual episode should always take precedence over the needs of the larger continuity. If an episode is better served by ignoring previous canon, they will ignore it. If an episode benefits from building on established lore, they will build on it. Consistency is a tool, not a rule, and it is deployed selectively based on what makes the story work. This philosophy reached its breaking point in season 20, when Parker and Stone attempted a fully serialized season that tracked the 2016 presidential election in real time. The season featured an ongoing storyline involving internet trolls, the member berries, and a version of the election that was being satirized as it unfolded. When the actual election produced a result that Parker and Stone did not anticipate, the serialized structure made it impossible to pivot without undermining the entire season's narrative foundation. The result was widely considered a creative failure, and Parker has acknowledged that the experiment went too far. The lesson of season 20 reinforced their original instinct. Continuity is useful in small doses, but dangerous when it becomes a constraint. The show's greatest episodes are almost always the self-contained ones, the stories that work as independent pieces of satire without requiring any knowledge of what came before. Scott Tenorman Must Die benefits from the later revelation about Jack Tenorman, but it works perfectly on its own. Make Love, Not Warcraft requires zero context to enjoy. The Return of Chef is more meaningful if you know about Isaac Hayes' departure, but it functions as a complete story regardless. South Park's relationship with its own continuity is, in many ways, a microcosm of its relationship with everything else. It does what works, it discards what does not, and it refuses to be bound by rules that do not serve the comedy. Let us discuss one final deep entry before we begin our closing thoughts: the Golden Era consensus. Among South Park's fan base, there is a remarkably consistent agreement about which seasons represent the show's creative peak. The general consensus, supported by critical reviews, fan polls, IMDb ratings, and Emmy wins, points to seasons 5 through 11 as the golden era of South Park. This period, spanning roughly from 2001 to 2007, produced many of the episodes that are universally cited as the show's best. Scott Tenorman Must Die is in season 5. The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers is in season 6. South Park is Gay and All About Mormons are in season 7. Good Times with Weapons and Woodland Critter Christmas are in season 8. Trapped in the Closet is in season 9. Make Love, Not Warcraft, and ManBearPig are in season 10. Imagination Land is in season 11. What makes this era stand out is the combination of sharpened writing, confident satire, and a willingness to take creative risks that somehow paid off almost every time. The show had moved past its early growing pains, but had not yet entered the period of creative uncertainty that some fans associate with the later seasons. Parker and Stone were at the peak of their abilities, fully in command of their characters, their format, and their satirical voice. The golden era also coincides with a period of significant real-world events that gave the show extraordinary material to work with. The September 11th attacks, the War on Terror, the rise of reality television, the early social media era, and the culture wars of the mid-2000s all provided rich targets for satire. South Park's 6-day production cycle allowed it to engage with these events faster than any competitor, and the writing team's sharpened skills allowed them to do so with increasing sophistication. The Emmy wins concentrated during this period further support the Golden Era designation. The show's first Emmy came in 2005, followed by wins in 2007 and 2008. The Peabody Award came in 2006. These honors validated what fans had been saying for years, that South Park during this period was producing some of the best satirical television in America. After season 11, the consensus becomes more divided. Seasons 12 through 14 are generally well regarded, with the Coon trilogy in season 14 and the 200/201 controversy adding significant entries to the show's mythology. But starting around season 15, opinions diverge more sharply. Some fans feel the show maintained its quality through the late 2000s. Others feel that the show's best days ended around season 14 or 15. The introduction of serialized storylines in season 18 added a new dimension to the debate, with some fans embracing the narrative ambition and others missing the episodic purity of earlier seasons. What is not debatable is that the show's cultural impact, regardless of fluctuations in episode quality, has remained remarkably consistent. Even during seasons that fans consider weaker, South Park continues to generate conversation, controversy, and cultural relevance at a level that few other television programs can match. A mediocre South Park episode still generates more discussion than an excellent episode of most other shows. And that is perhaps the most impressive thing about the show. After 28 seasons, 338 episodes, and nearly 3 decades on the air, South Park is still capable of being the most talked about program on television in any given week. That is not a function of consistent quality, because no show maintains consistent quality over that span. It is a function of cultural embeddedness. South Park is woven so deeply into the fabric of American pop culture that its presence is felt even when individual episodes falter. The iceberg metaphor is particularly apt for South Park because the show has always been about hidden depths. On the surface, it looks simple: paper cutout animation, fart jokes, a kid who dies every episode. But underneath that surface, there are layers of mythology, production history, personal biography, cultural commentary, and genuine artistic ambition that rival anything in American television. The deeper you go, the more you find. And at the very bottom, in the darkest and most obscure corners of the iceberg, you find a show that is still, after all these years, full of surprises. And that brings us to the final thoughts of this 3-hour journey. We started at the surface with 4 boys at a bus stop and a catchphrase about a kid who cannot stay dead. We went below the waterline into the real mythology of Kenny's immortality and the 14-year mystery of Cartman's father. We entered the Twilight Zone, where Mary Kay Bergman's secret double life and the evolution of the show's theme song revealed hidden layers of production history. We dove into the deep, where permanent deaths, censored episodes, and Trey Parker's personal vendettas painted a more complex picture of the show's creative process. We reached the abyss, where power outages, self-loathing about Season 2, and India's decade-long ban added to the show's already extraordinary list of real-world consequences. We descended to the Hadal Zone, where Kenny's muffled words, the name swap theory, and the Peabody paradox challenged everything we thought we knew about the show's identity. And we reached the trench, where missed deadlines, falling out with voice actors, And the compressed modern seasons revealed a show that is still evolving, still adapting, and still fighting to stay relevant in a world that has changed beyond recognition since 1997. Think about what the world looked like when South Park premiered. Bill Clinton was president. The Spice Girls were the biggest music act on the planet. Google did not exist yet. YouTube would not launch for another 8 years. The iPhone was a decade away. Social media, as we know it, was unimaginable. People watched television on actual televisions at the time the network told them to. And a show made of construction paper cutouts debuted on a cable channel that most people had never heard of. 28 years later, that same show has outlasted entire media companies. It has outlasted social networks, it has outlasted political movements and cultural trends and entire genres of entertainment. Shows that were considered its competitors in the early 2000s have either ended or faded into irrelevance. South Park is still here, still producing new episodes, still making people angry, still making people laugh, still hiding depths beneath its crude surface that reward the kind of obsessive, layer-by-layer analysis that we have spent the last 3 hours conducting. The construction paper is gone, the stop motion is gone, the college students are now millionaires many times over. But the fundamental engine of the show, two friends sitting in a room trying to make each other laugh about whatever is happening in the world that week, has not changed. That engine has powered 28 seasons, 338 episodes, 1 theatrical film, 7 streaming specials, 3 major video games, a Broadway musical that won 9 Tony Awards, a Guinness World Record, a Peabody Award, a ban by the Chinese government, a ban by the Indian government, death threats from extremists, $1.5 billion, 2 men in dresses at an award ceremony, and 1 kid in an orange parka who has died more times than anyone can count and will never, ever stay dead. And it all started with 2 college kids, a few sheets of construction paper, and a fight between Jesus and a snowman. That is the South Park iceberg. If you made it all the way to the bottom, thank you for being here. Subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment telling me which layer of the iceberg surprised you the most. And if you think I missed something, there's a very good chance that I did, because 28 years of South Park is a lot of iceberg. Let me know what you would add. I will see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.